Right?
Not everyone.
We don't have a quorum yet.
Yeah, we do. Ish.
Now that Nick walked in.
Almost nap time. It's gotta be over by 12.
I can smell that coffee through this mask.
And you're not a coffee person.
No, it smells good though.
Yeah.
Fire and police. I can't see anybody over here. You know, somebody that they're sitting. Well, you see, you've got the same view I do. You
Yeah,
can't see anybody.
I can't see that. I can see this way.
These people, I was like,
Yeah, like Tracy had to jump over yesterday. I said, wait, I didn't even know she was there.
Don't have any attendees today? Attendees? No. What happened to everybody want to show up in public?
This here, I just realized that on my back. I sat down, that right there is what hurts, right there.
Bars. The bar.
I saw it over. And it's still, I'm gonna take that picture. I was trying not to.
Take Advil or something.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's good.
The box on them.
Yeah. Don't give me a hard time.
Maybe it's
I'll take your chocolates from me.
switch it out. How are you?
Very good, Miss Bales. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you. In person.
There you go. She doesn't mean that. She does.
Yes, I do. And he knows it.
Thanks, I'm trying to be a sunny person.
Hey, you working out here today?
Even better, brighter.
Is it me or is it hot in here?
Seems warmer. You know what it is? It's just the sun's out.
Coffee.
Let's turn some lights off and make it look like it's cloudy again.
Works for me as long as
Yeah,
it
can't
cools
keep
it off.
people here.
My fingers are slow.
Forgot Lori's umbrella yesterday.
Lance brought his own chair today.
I want the cherries.
Oh, he's doing it for me.
Oh, okay. Very nice of him. Did you work out this morning?
Oh, that was so nice of him.
Oh, did you?
Then we went to that vodka place, that vodka distillery place.
Oh, yeah, Ventura.
So,
Good to, it's nice. I didn't have the vodka.
Yeah, drink liquors.
I bought a bottle. Yeah, you got a good.
Is it a neat little atmosphere?
Yeah,
Very cool.
And I took a picture. I was all like, oh, people would be dusty.
yeah.
Okay. So we're live on Facebook and all that? Okay. All right, welcome to day 2. Got a lot presented to us yesterday. A lot of needs, a lot of wants. I guess today we're going to determine which we need the most. So, Chief, welcome.
Maskless? We going maskless here so I can talk?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the invite, and like always, I hope I don't bore you. I hope this is one of the more exciting presentations. And there ain't much want in here, so that's probably a good thing. Glad you brought that up. There is a handout for you, a book. That's additional information. It has nothing to do with the presentation, but it's something to take home. It really has a good breakdown of this kind of calls we go on and where they're at. Some apparatus about trucks and how many calls they run and how many calls you run during the month and stuff like that. So just take it home with you, and if you want to look at something like that. There's your discussion topics. A lot of it's some of the same stuff that we've been talking about throughout the years. Probably the new one is staffing. I've heard from a bunch of you that, where we're going, where we want to be in the next. So I made a 10-year plan, 20-year plan, whatever you want to do. That's going to be really up to you, but I felt we should start talking about staffing and where we need to be. So there's just a little breakdown between the call comparison. I won't read it line from line, but you can see that the amount of incidents in 2020 has declined, and really that's because of the COVID. You'll see in the graph or two that, when we shut down the state, a lot of people just stayed home. There was a lot less calls. People didn't want to go to the hospital because they were afraid they're going to get COVID. The supplies for PPE were a lot less. So obviously a lot of us just stayed home, and that brought down the number on the EMS calls. So you can see there's about 16% drop. As far as property loss, that's always in there, the amount of fires that we go to. So we do come up with a value every year. You can see the average response times is actually going up, and that's as the town gets bigger. There's more of an impact for driving, especially as they're starting to build out towards Raymond Church Road and the Hiawassee Road area and the Huntersville Concord Road area. Traffic's getting a little more out there, so it takes a little more time to get out that way. And there you got one of the first graphs that show you that big dip that would happen in April. April, May, and June, that's when we really shut down a lot of stuff, and that's when the governor shut down some stuff. And there was less calls, and then we came right back into October, November, December with right back to the norm. It was the year of the virus, and we're still in the year of the virus, I believe. But everybody's real familiar, and a lot of you have the N95 mask. 95% of the virus is supposed to be, blocked and captured. When we do go on virus calls and they're in the system for medic, if you're a lab positive like patient, we know about it prior to going in your home. And that's how we dress for lab positive patients. Eyewear, mask, the gown that you see, and it's all disposed of once we leave your home. So it's put in a biohazard bag, and then we get a company to pick them all up and we burn them. And then in the beginning, this happens a lot, and still does, we go into a quarantine stage. If I work around one of you and I end up getting COVID and they tell you, hey, you gotta get 14 days of COVID or quarantine, you end up like a zoo animal behind a piece of glass, and your family comes to visit you and looks at you. They don't understand a lot of times, the young ones, but this does happen a bunch. It actually happened about 27 times in the month of December for us. So 27 firefighters out of work, sitting behind, waiting. That was the worst month we had, though, was December. Believe it or not, we got 0 now in February. We could say more of it because of the shock. We don't know. A lot of people like myself have took it right from the start, but it's definitely dropped a bunch, which is a great thing. They were going on about 2 or 3 COVID calls a day, probably in the month of December, just to give you an idea. The worst part probably about that is that, there's a 5% chance you could get COVID wearing that mask. Well, when you go into someone's house 2 or 3, 4 times, your chances yourself go up. Now, instead of you having a 5% chance of catching COVID, well, it might have went up to 20 because you went on 4 calls. So, that's the worst part about probably being in the fire service going on COVID calls. Now, this was a map that was probably taken for the January presentation, and you can see this over on the Mecklenburg County's website. And there's those little facts that we were just talking about 24 firefighters during that time. And that number goes up daily. It does, but it seems like it's at that point where it's nice and getting pretty straight. So hopefully that'll even decline even more and more. The biggest incident probably throughout the whole year was the pipeline. That's just a simple shot taken from the EPA. Gave me this picture that they were able to take all the pictures they wanted, because she's probably seen signs out there. Those are some of the metering devices that are out there on the site, and they were trying to just make sure the air quality was really good. I thought the biggest thing for me to tell you was that after the initial call, and we go out there, we stayed out there for probably, I think it was 14 to 24 days, why that leak was going on and why they were trying to capture product. All that was billable. So once that initial call was basically over, from the day after to the 24 days that they wanted a fire truck out there and they wanted people out there, we were able to bill them. We did ruin a lot of turnout gear because, that initial call we were walking around in gasoline, and that stuff just doesn't come out of the gear, and we're not gonna send somebody into a fire with, gear soaked with gasoline. And same thing with the hoses. All the hoses that were laid out there were, contaminated and everything else. But all that was billable. Once they decided that they no longer need the fire service out there, they cut us a check for the whole bill. All the hoses were replaced, all the PPE was replaced, even for the trucks. We had the trucks decontaminated and cleaned up, and we had to send them for pump testing because they were constantly in that pump gear ready to go, and it does take a little wear and tear on them, and they paid the maintenance bills and everything. So $0 after the initial call. That's a good thing. Any questions on just the first little part? I know it's just a little brief history and what's going on around there, but the books tell you a lot more, I think. Land search, we'll just move into that. Again, we're constantly looking for the land in that yellow area. Hiawassee is still if I want to say, the heart of it. Hiawassee Raymond Church Road area. It's, I ride out there every day I work, and I look for the person that's throwing up the for sale sign on their land without, hiring a realtor, or I'm not walking out there with a blank check, because I don't speak for any of you, and I don't know what you want to pay for land, but I'm just the eyes and ears. I talked to Mr. Bradford and a couple of landowners out there. The Baron Wilkingtons were really good, close, relationships with them. But it's just a matter of just finding that proper piece of land. And then if we do find it, obviously tell management, and we'll discuss it any further. But it's just a matter of just finding the piece of land. I mean, it's not that we're dragging our feet. It goes on every day, but it's just finding that perfect piece, not to waste any money, and making sure it's not too big, because a lot of people, landowners out there, they got 20, 40 acres, and we only need about 5 to 6 for what we're trying to do.
And when would you anticipate a need to actually build Station 5?
There's not enough call volume to actually build it. And that's the thing, once the call volume goes up, now the response time to get out there has always taken forever. And we have to find a piece of land that has water. That's our biggest holdback. When we tried to move in on maybe a piece of land out there, and we were gonna take a house and maybe reconvert it, Mecklenburg County said, oh no, you gotta build a fire station just like we do downtown Charlotte. Well, we're in a rural area, and they don't care about that. The county doesn't care about that. They want to say, if you're going to sleep people out there, you're going to have a fire station with sprinklers, which we were going to do. We were going to sprinkle it, but it can't be on a well. So again, our hands are tied because there's no water out there. Unless Seabud, drops about, I think it was 3 miles, 2 to 3 miles of water line from the last hydrant into that area, our hands are pretty tied. So we just want to really just get ahead of finding that land piece for when they do, extend that pipe all the way out there. At least we own the land.
Can I add too, so each year, just by way of reminder, each year we ask you to approve an agreement with Mecklenburg County to serve the ETJ. And so, and please recall that the county levies a fire tax in the ETJ, and they support us, which we in turn around and use that to
So Chief, so there's two ways to look for the property. One way to see if a for sale sign goes up and see if, but another way is to identify exactly the perfect piece of property for Station 5. Have you identified the perfect location, the perfect piece, regardless of whether or not we've talked to the owners or if it's even for sale?
Right. There's a great piece of property that sits on the corner of Raymond Church and Hiawassee that we've, really wanted. It
Is
sits
that
on
that
6
wedge,
acres.
in that wedge?
Yeah.
Where you can cross, but that's
Yeah.
the one I thought when I
Yeah.
go out there.
Yeah, and it sits on 6 acres of land. Obviously, that takes you back into town using Hiawassee or Raymond Church Road, or you could head during Huntersville Concord. So anytime you have great access points to take you to the furthest part, back into town, I mean, that's the best place for fire stations. Something that runs 360. We ain't gonna make the same mistake we made on Eastfield Road. We ain't gonna stick it on Highway 73 and one part's across the street that's not ours and the other part behind us is. So if we could find that point right there, that's the key part. It's just a matter of, again, getting the water down there. But I think that area is the best part.
So, we've identified the perfect parcel.
Yeah.
Has anybody talked to the property owner?
Yes.
We actually know them. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because water's one issue,
No.
but also the best thing is identifying, we know the right parcel, just keep talking to them and see if something comes up. Because, a lot of people, they may not want to sell right now, but they always do
Yes.
at some point.
And that has some family history. Chief knows obviously all about that. And fireman, family history also.
Makes
So-
it even better when they are ready to sell.
Right.
And we have addressed we've talked to Charlotte Water on multiple occasions about the water issue and how we could address that. So they're ready to, they don't want to just lay the line out there for the sake of it, but if there's a fire emergency issue, we're building a fire station, they'll work with us. We haven't put anything on a hunk of paper yet because we haven't identified the land, but we've sat down with them, pinpointed the land that where we'd like to be, and how do we address the water, sewer issue, et cetera. Because water and sewer are close by in those areas, especially where he's talking about, but they still both need to be addressed.
Okay. So is it a different size line? Because I'm sure it's right there on McCord Road, which is right 100 feet away from this.
Yeah, it's basically the supply line that'll, feed hydrants, which is usually between now, they used to build them like 5-inch, now they're putting them all 6 to 12-inch, depending on the water supply. But that's the only thing they need to come down there with.
Yeah, it's a perfect site, so hopefully we can get it one day.
Right, me too. So that's what it'll look like, obviously, if that area in that corner that we're talking about, ever does get developed. Station 1's kind of like the hub of the center, which is very important because that one does serve all the other fire stations. When you got a heart in the center, that's the key thing. It runs the most calls, it'll be at the most calls, but at the same time, it's the center of our town area, especially for the fire stations. And you can see by keeping that one station up there towards Station 5, that serves that area. I thought it was amazing that, me and Anthony and Jackie, talking about the CMUD in the county about, hey, we want to provide a service out there. Our citizens need a fire station out there. It's taking longer, but they're so, stuck on that water. Water's everything. It's amazing, how they think about that. But they forget that there's part of the county that is rural areas. Not everybody that has a giant, skylines and everything else. But it's crazy. We're going to go into I brought the next slide. Will go into like a Station 2 area, so you can see where Station 2 is now, and it serves McGuire Nuclear Power Station and the whole Burkdale area. We did that little study, I think, with Cornelius, and that group kind of recommended maybe one of these days you might need a filling station between like the North Cross Drive area. But you could do a filling station, or Station 2's got a lot of wear and tear on it. It's built back in the 60s. My next thing is, instead of a filling station, maybe we can move it in. And you'll see that Irvin Cook Road area, I believe, on the next slide, which is right here. I think there's a development getting ready to go out there, the Cook development. And, Mr. Cook's on the fire department. He owns a lot of land out there. So we're working with him a little bit and his family that maybe we could eventually, take Irvin Cook Road, and if we have to do a filling station, maybe we just take an existing station that's old, it's out of date. We did a lot of upgrades to where it's livable now, but it'll never be for the future. Let's face it, we could never go past 4 people in there. You know, eventually, these fire stations, you try to put maybe 8, because you build them for that. You build them for the future. You build them for additional apparatus. And here's a fire station that goes to the lake, and they got a lake response, so they're gonna have to have a boat on it and stuff like that. So I took existing maps that you had online, and obviously you can see, there's one of those maps will be to your right, has a big, nice red circle around it. That's, again, a 6-acre lot. You can see that, eventually, maybe with land and road, there's some roads that go back to the Burkdale area, the back side of Winfield, I believe that is. So again, you're getting a fire station in an area that you could run multiple locations. You don't want to be just stuck saying, oh my God, all I could do is go left or right. You want to have a 360 around you. So if we eventually want to get rid of a fire station that is old and not going anywhere and ain't going to get any bigger, let's try to move it in. That'll be more of our fill-in station rather than adding an additional station. That's going to save you money because you're just going to get one that serves a different area.
Chief, what's the policy or the procedure when you get a call and you have to leave, and let's say there's a station right there and it backs up to some houses, or think of Station 4. Does the sirens come on the minute you come out of the garage, or the minute you get on McElwain, or do you get further down the road so it doesn't
Right. As soon as
completely
we
impact
approach an
everybody?
intersection or a traffic or basically a car coming at us, we're supposed to have 2 warning signals on.
Okay.
That's basically the law. One being the red lights, that doesn't have any noise, and then some kind of audible siren. When we built Station 4, we got a lot of comments right from Cedarfield. They were worried about, noise. And thank God, as that group of people started working there, they know, hey, if you got to turn the siren on, don't turn the siren on. I turn sirens off even when we're going into developments. I mean, there's not
Yeah.
much traffic at 3 o'clock in the morning in the development, and that's why you might hear about the fire truck was in your development. They heard it, but they didn't really hear the siren. They just come in with the lights on. So that's one. As long as we have 2 warning devices, but it could be cut off at any time.
Oh, okay, thank you.
But there's a potential for Station 2. Again, we're looking at plots of land that we could get 360 and still respond to the area that fire station serves, and Ms. Phillips, that area that she lives in, but it's going to have better access to the future.
Well, and sitting and watching, at the corner where our store is, your trucks get stuck in that 5 o'clock traffic, and I'm like, my skin crawls because, seconds matter when you guys are called, and that intersection and mess, it would be wonderful to see you guys on 73 for your own safety too.
Right? You're definitely right. The more
Chief.
traffic, the slower we get to go.
Chief, is there water to this site?
Yes, that area has water.
Okay, thanks.
It's definitely not 3 miles or anything like that. Especially, if you're approving a development, it has to have hydrants. And that's why I've been looking for areas that you're already approving. I know the hydrant's gonna be there. It ain't gonna cost any more for us.
Okay, thank you.
And the same thing here, Chief. You've made contact with folks, obviously, in this area too.
Anything on the, maybe future? This is all, I feel this is part of the education part, me educating you. I don't expect you to be, fire experts, but at the same time, I'm hoping you get a lot out of this. This is on there every year, and I like to show you and improve it every year. So you have 2 trucks that are getting ready to be replaced in 2022. Again, they've got their cycle of about 20 years. I think as time goes on, 20 years we're having a lot of hard time getting parts for trucks that are that old, because in the fire service, just a lot different from cars where they keep manufacturing parts. Once a truck has been built for 5-6 years, those people are trying to look at different ways, better air conditioning systems, better ways to build their trucks. And then when you have a truck that's about 20 years old, it gets a little harder to find the parts when they break. So a lot of the truck replacement that you see is not only based on years, it's based on, what's it costing to keep this apparatus on the road. After about 5 years, when you buy a new truck, 5 years, you got that bumper-to-bumper warranty. It works out great. And anything that's broke, they fix it, but after that 5 years, it becomes a money pit. So you can imagine holding on to a truck for 15 more years, and anything that goes down or anything that breaks, it gets to that point where it's real expensive. We did flip-flop 2 trucks here. Those 2 trucks that are getting replaced in 2022 were at 2024, and that rescue was supposed to be replaced in 2022. Reason we did that? Again, we look at what's costing, you know, the taxpayer to keep that truck. If it's not worth the money anymore, and it's costing us more and more money, let's unload them. We get rid of them, we sell them. We sell them to somebody that needs, you know, a truck that's even better than what they got. That money that we sell the truck for, again, is used as a down payment for the new existing truck. So if you sell a truck for $100,000, well, we take that $100,000, and when it's time to buy that new truck, it just rolls into that. What's the best terminology? Existing debt is gonna be paid off for one to become another? Paying off a ladder truck and then
Yeah,
going.
certain trucks will be rolling off the books and new ones will be rolling in its place.
Right.
So basically, whatever debt we were paying for those trucks that are rolling off will basically go towards new ones rolling off. Right?
Yes, that's the best way to explain it. In 2012, we bought a ladder truck. It sits at Station 4. 10 years is the amount of financial payment on it. So that truck in 2022 will be paid off. You already gave us money to obviously fund a ladder truck, so I will not be coming to you in 2022 for any additional money. The funds are already there to pay that next 10 years of 2 new fire apparatus.
You have debt service payments that will conclude, and then so the new debt service payments will just come in the exact place, so you won't be asking for an increase in debt service.
Yes, ma'am. No debt service. And we set this up.
What are you existing debt that's at an interest rate of more than 3.5%? I don't think you got one tied through.
Right, when we funded the ladder truck in 2020, 2.6, I believe we paid. And we find out what the interest rate is going to be, and we bring it to finance and town management. Even before we always want to know, can you get a better interest rate, or is this good? So there's nothing that's, you know, we've done that for the last, you know, I think 10 to 15 years, just to make sure the best interest rate is being obtained. And this is how this whole truck schedule, when I started making this in 2010, just so we could look at the long term, it was about, you know, one debt ending, another debt starting, but trying to keep the same payment. Now the trucks, you'll see a lot of them are in the thousands right now, but you can see as time goes on, those same trucks, they start with $1 million now. You know, what we paid for on the tower ladder, you know, at $1.4 million, you know, it'll be up to like 2.8 20 years from now. Everything goes up 5% at a minimum. So in 20 years, that's 100% difference. You know, those 2 fire trucks that are going to get replaced for $750,000 a piece, you know, 20 years ago, we paid 300-something thousand for them, wherever half of that was.
You think they'll be electric in 20 years?
Probably not fire trucks. Now, a lot of stuff on the fire truck, you know, from 20 years ago, I can show you a 20-year-old fire truck, you know, compared to a newer version, and everything now is battery operated. You know, from the jaws of life to the sawzalls to you know, the tick cameras that we go inside of fires with. You know, back in the day, they were all, you know, they weren't battery operated, but all that technology has really improved. And of course, anything electronic raises the price, and that's where we're at. Any questions on truck replacement? And this is something that I think most of you wanted to see, maybe not all of you.
Chief, me with Lacey, we don't go out for 2035.
So we had asked the chief to look at, I think, on some of the, when we asked the board, you know, sort of questions that you wanted to address, et cetera. One of them was look at possibly bringing fire department in-house. When I say in-house, you know, sort of bringing it over under the town umbrella at some point in time. So chief looked at that, and he's going to, you know, tell you where we are today, staffing. You know, do we need to do that today? Do we need to look at that, you know, in the future, et cetera? So that's what this is all about.
So once you get into the career department, you know, NFPA tells you that you got to be, you know, do public by career fire departments. You also have to meet the 2 in, 2 out, meaning there'll be 4 people on a fire truck, just like the city of Charlotte. And that's what they want. They want, if 2 people go inside, they want 2 people outside. And of course, if anything happens major to the firefighters. A lawyer, like the one that you have at the end of the table, will tear your ass up probably with NFPA, and she's gonna address that and say, this is why we're, getting sued and everything else, because you didn't, do it. But then NFPA, of course, is always some people say it's a recommendation, but a person like herself will follow to a T, because that's what they do, and that's her job. So when you look at the 2020 staffing model, which is current today, there's your amount of people that you have on duty with the funds that we have. And then nighttime, it does still change. If you see at the very bottom, you got 20 people during the day, 15 at night. Well, the reason is that because we're still the combination fire department. We rely on Dan Boone and Mr. Hines when he's off at night to come back and help us out. And it also saves us money. I mean, that's how it works. But when you make that transition from no longer volunteers part, you're gonna have a Mr. Hines and a Boone on your staff and he's gonna be paid 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he's gonna have to come back. So that's why there is a difference in the staffing there. You can also see that there's 6 apparatus during the day on duty, and we cut it down by 1 at night, because when you look at those books, the amount of calls drop at night. We're a pretty safe town. There's a lot of big fires at night that you see in the next day on the news, but as far as going on a lot of calls, it ain't nothing like during the day. But again, it saves us money as a town. So when you make that career, that combination to career, you'll look at some of the expectations, and I won't read those to you, they're pretty self-explanatory. But the part to the right is the crew staffing. You'll have to have four members on the apparatus day and night. That'll bring you up to there. When you go to initial alarm, which we mean is, when the trucks are dispatched to a house fire, how many people do you want, at that call? The safe operating number is 28. So that's the number I think we should always shoot for, to have 28 people on staff. Now, when you put 28 people on staff, and that's spread out between 4 fire stations, and a fire comes in, you can't dump all those people at the one fire station. That's the problem. And that's the problem, and that's why we have mutual aid with the city of Charlotte, and we got mutual aid with Davidson and Cornelius, is that we only bring about two people, but the other ones have to serve our town. They have to still, if someone's having a heart attack down the road, they want that service. They don't care that somebody else is, getting it. They want that service. But 28 people is what we're gonna shoot for. And you can see as, you get into business fires and stuff like that, NFPA and they recommend higher number. But that's where you call for more help. I'm not gonna tell you right here, well, man, we need 43, we might have a business fire. Well, we'll have 43 people there. We'll just get it from other parts. Cornelius has always done a great job, and so has Davidson. The city of Charlotte, when we pulled that big red handle, you're getting everything you want. But again, 28 people, I think, is what we need to look at moving forward.
Chief, what's the closest city of Charlotte fire station?
So we're lucky enough to have, I'll say 2. There's one in that Highland Creek area, across the street from Station 3, about a mile in. And then there's one on Old Statesville Road as soon as you cross over Harris. So as soon as you cross over Harris Boulevard, it's right there on the right-hand side. And they could be here in minutes, depending on where they're coming, obviously in town. But they're the 2 closest ones. So keep that in your head when we shoot for 28. That's what we're gonna shoot for. Just the average, did a little research online, obviously, and used the League of Municipalities and looked at population, because that's how you're gonna pay your staff. And I'm shooting, that's how you pay your police officers and everybody else. So just looking at the average of what a firefighter, the engineer, the captain make, and there's your averages, and obviously I'll put some max salaries on there. Just to give you an idea, Davidson Fire Department, they have full-time engineers, which is only 3 of them, because they only have 3, but they're around the $54,000 mark. So you'll be keeping up with the Joneses, I don't see you ever keeping up with the city of Charlotte. And that's why the combination part works so well, because you get a very high-paid firefighter or captain or chief, and he comes up here and we get to slash his number and get all that good experience. Just to give you an idea, a captain in the city of Charlotte makes $98,000. So you'll never keep up with that part.
Is full-time considered like the corporate world 40 hours, or is it different depending on the week and their shifts for the month?
So as a contract of service, we have to follow the 40-hour rule. Anything over 40 hours, you pay the person overtime. And a couple of years ago, we set aside about $100,000 when the state made that adjustment. I'm not sure if anybody remembers that, but for the overtime part, which keeps us going. Now, once you get into you're a municipality like the city of Charlotte, Concord, and Davison, they go follow the 52-hour week mark. They can work 52 hours and don't owe them overtime till if they work 52 hours. It's kind of federal law. My suggestion when we start this is always you build it from the bottom. You know, if you're gonna build a football team, baseball team, you start from the bottom. You get the players. 28 is what we're looking for. Once we get 28 players, and we can start saying, okay, we're gonna take this group and make them town employees. We're gonna take the next group, make them town employees. And it's gonna be up to you as we go through the slides, how long you want this to take. It could take 10 years, it could take 20 years. You know, if you like building greenways, parks, and rec, and that's your thing right now, don't hurt something that's not broken. That's my suggestion to you. I also tell you that, you know, it's very hard to take experienced people and then say, well, we're gonna bring Jackie on, and we're gonna give her medical insurance, and she's gonna be as good as this person. You have to weigh that out. You know, just because you get medical insurance in retirement doesn't mean you're very good at your job. So just, you know, throwing that out there. But it could be started, I'm just telling you, at any time. But we gotta get to 28 first.
So
You know,
what percentage of the current people in the fire department here work for another fire department full-time?
Probably 98%.
98%. So it'd have to be pretty good move for them to come be full-time here. So would you anticipate the 28 would be brand new?
I would say they're brand new based on what I heard from the Cornelius Fire Department going through it this year. I believe the people that they're gonna hire came from a different state.
Okay.
And that's where it's gonna be tough, you know, to find those people. Because if they ain't working for Charlotte or East Lincoln, or they ain't working for Concord already, which are very higher paying positions, you just have to keep up with that kind of money. And,
Right.
but yeah, it'd probably be people from all over the country, I'm sure, when you post something like this, because you're gonna have to post it. The fortunate part with Huntsville Fire Department right now, I handpick the people that are gonna work for us. Why do I handpick them? Because if I could trust them to go to my house and take care of my daughter and my wife, I know I could trust them with yours.
Sure.
So I figured, why not put the best people on the fire apparatus?
So Chief, here would be my question. I don't think most people realize that we outsource essentially fire service.
Right.
I don't think most people in town know we completely outsource our fire department. And you guys do a great job. You know that. The fire rates are very low and those. I guess the question is, you know, and I think you and I talked one time and I said, you know, if we know a lot of our firemen come from Charlotte, but, you know, if a plane hit the Bank of America building and Charlotte recalled all their firefighters, that leaves us in a difficult position. Also, at what point, you know, you mentioned you've got good applicants, et cetera. I mean, Davison is hiring for the fire department. I know their model's probably a little different than Cornelius. The question is, at what point do we get to where we limit that exposure of, again, not hate for a plane to hit the Bank of America building or something, and where we are today? In other words, how do we protect the town as well as continue to maintain the great service that you guys are doing for the town?
So, we go back to Charlotte and we'll use Charlotte as an example, whether it's Bank of America. You know, obviously, Chief Johnson's he doesn't tell anybody what they can or can't do on their days off. You know, when I left there this morning, he didn't say I couldn't come up here and work, whether you're a grass cutter or a firefighter or anything. And if a big incident does happen, again, there's 1,100 of us. We ride with 300 daily. There's 800 people out there that are just around this county, maybe multiple counties, that could come back, you know, if a big incident happens. But if you're working for us, no one has ever left the Huntersville Fire Department. Now, we've been in an epidemic for a year, right? Worst case scenario, probably. Worse than probably a building on fire, because we know that's only gonna take maybe a day. We've been here for a year. The worst amount of staffing I ever seen them had to bring back was 53 people. There's 700, well, there's 700 out there that still didn't get brought back, and that was 53 people on a Saturday. And when they started COVID pay, and they said it wasn't gonna be charged to your sick time, well, I think that number was a little probably inflated, because people said, yeah, it's a Saturday, it's nice outside, I ain't gotta go to work, and then they're not gonna charge me sick time. So 53 people during an pandemic was the worst, you know, I ever seen brought back. Now, I've laid out what I call the 10-year plan, because I need you to build the amount of staffing to get the team where you need to be, and then you could really decide, once we get to those 28 people, you know, how many do we want to take on at a time? And I urge you to do it slowly. I don't think if you want to jump in there with everything and say, all right, we're going to take 28, and remember, this is 28 people a day. So, you know, you have 3 shifts in the fire department, which, you know, that's a whole nother educational part. But when these 28 people leave at 8 o'clock in the morning, 28 more come in. And then after that, those 28 people leave, another 28 come in. So you're talking about 84 firefighters that are just on those fire trucks. I'm not talking about some white shirts or anything like that. So you're up to about 84 people, you know, full-time people. So don't think of it as, oh my God, I only need 28. Please don't. You're gonna need 84 of us. That's 28 per day, and we keep following that same pattern of work a day, off a day, work a day. Eventually you work about 10 days a month, which is a great thing. And that's why we have great part-time jobs and come up here. You can see the current model and what it's costing. I considered it to be 17 paid part-time staffs daily. You know, I'm taking the number 20 during the day, 15 at night. I'm telling you, you have about 17 full-timers that, you know, we work. Where are we trying to get to? 28, right? So we need 11 more. If you built it over the next 10 years, 11 years, and you wanted to meet, you said, Chief, I told him, add a person every year for the next 10 years. If you told me to add 11 people next year, I'll add 11 people next year. But you just got to realize, by the time we get to those 11 people, and then you're going to have to turn around and say, okay, this $14 guy is now a $17 guy. We got to come up with that money. We got to come up with the retirement part, and we got to come up with the medical part, which I have never got involved in because I have no idea what the town is. You're about up to the $7.1, $7.5 million staffing. Now, we will be a $9 million department because this is just a staffing part. You know, you still got to pay for the trucks and the fuels and stuff like that, and you'll have a $9 million fire department. But just realize you're going from 3.4 to 7.1, and that's to build that 28-person crew. It's really up to you. You tell me to start it. There's nothing in the budget for this year for staffing, but you know, y'all make the decision next year, and you say 1 person every year, 2 people every year, 11 at one time.
Yeah, and that's why we'll continue to look at this. And Chief's going to continue, I'm sure, unless the board says, oh, no, we want you to go to full-time department, you know, within 2 years or today. Over time, we'll continue to look at this every year. If he needs staffing, like you've seen in previous years, he's going to come back and ask for, you know, some staffing, paid part-time staffing. But the model we have right now is, and I've asked Chief this 1,000 times, probably tired of hearing it. I said, Chief, okay, do we need to go full-time? You got to tell us, you're the expert. Let us know, because this board has been very gracious and, you know, giving you what you need, but you got to tell us. And, you know, I think he's telling you right now we're fine. We can handle these situations. But I'm sure in coming years he's going to, you know, ask for more staff as needed. And y'all have been gracious enough to do that.
Commissioner Walsh, I interpret your question earlier as do we have enough resources? How would we respond if there were a major incident in town? And I'd say a direct response to that would be mutual aid between Charlotte and Cornelius and our other area departments. And while you have, do I interpret the slides earlier, you have between 20 and 15 people at the 4 stations right now, plus you have ballpark 110 people on staff. So while Charlotte has the 2,300 and 300 are reporting at any one time, your comparable numbers would be 15 and then 110. So between the 110 and mutual aid, there would be people to respond would be your answer.
So as a follow-up to that, obviously you're pretty familiar with, I'm sure, Cornelius and Davison. Why is their model different, and why would
I've
they be
always,
headed in that direction? And
I get calls from all around the state of South Carolina, North Carolina, asking how do you keep staffing there, you know, and doing it as a combination, because we're the largest in Mecklenburg County, obviously. I don't know anybody that's bigger than us in the state that does a combination. I think me and Anthony could take this show on the road and probably sell what we know, what I know, and what he knows as far as this goes.
as long as you got Huntersville covered, I'm good.
Yeah, and that's the key thing. You know, we're fortunate enough to have a powerhouse fire department to our south. Not many people have that. That's what makes, I think, Huntersville Fire Department and our, you know, what we provide experience-wise, and doing it at a cheaper rate, I would say, because I'm so powerful and so good. You know, we've taken people that run 3,000 to 4,000 calls, and I'm putting them on a fire truck up here, and they have all this experience, and we don't have to pay for that part. You know,
And I can
they're
tell you,
training.
to piggyback on the chief, I can tell you why Cornelius and Davidson. It was because manpower, woman power. They were shifts that were not getting covered, so they didn't have enough men or women on the truck to cover some of those shifts. We even tried, and when I was in Cornelius on holidays, think, well, you know what time and a half, what the heck, pay them double time, triple time. Some folks, if they're working full time, I want to be with my family over Christmas, et cetera. So they had problems trying to find the paid part-timers to consistently fill those positions. So that's why Davidson moved to what they've done, and then Cornelius is in the process of doing it. They've pushed it out, where they're continuing to try to do the process. But what they're finding out, in reality, we're probably going to have more access to even more people because they're doing that. So we've been fortunate. I mean, we may have to go, next year we may come back and say, you know what, guys, we're in a different boat. We got to do the exact same thing they're doing. Right now, Chief's telling me we got the manpower, woman power. I hope Chief Hoyle gets up here and says the same thing. Messing with him. But I'll put this money, this $4 million, $5 million towards greenways and everything else we got. But one day we will have to move, no doubt. I just don't know exactly when. And we're getting a good bang for the buck.
You just had to mention the greenways, right? Because you know I love the greenways, and you're like, oh, I know how to hit them.
Do not discount the impact of us having firefighters who work full-time for somebody else. Charlotte is training their full-time firefighters. Concord is training their full-time firefighters. So when they come to work for us as part-time people, if they submit to the chief their verification that they've been trained, think of the number of training dollars that saves us. So we go full-time paid fire. Somebody's gonna have to pick up, are they trained or not? We'll have to provide that training, and that training won't come at no cost, and it won't come probably at a low cost.
Questions?
Commissioner Boone has his hand up.
Chief, there was 6 citizen complaints in 2020. How does that compare to the previous year? And can you give me an example of one of those citizens' complaints?
Most of your complaints that you get are not from the fire side or the EMS side going on calls, because anything that comes from EMS would come from the doctor. It's usually a fire apparatus have gone to an intersection and they were blowing the horn at me. We've had one complaint that we didn't pick up their refrigerator. We had one complaint also that we broke their door down. But the reason that we have to break someone's door down is because maybe a family member can't get in touch with somebody, and they called us at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they were concerned. And when we got there with police, because we never enter someone's home without police, we don't know what's on the upside side of that door. And a lot of times we will break what I call break the door down, open the door, usually break something. We'll send the police officer in first, you know, just because, I mean, going to someone's home, you never know, they might be armed. I've seen it in Charlotte. So we send them in first, and, you know, big guinea pig, and We'll send the chief in there one day. He can go in there. But I was here today really just to be better dressed than him also. I want to throw that out. But those are the kind of complaints we get, Mr. Boone. It's not the service, it's not the service that you get when you get there. It's mostly getting there because you're blowing horns real loud and you're trying to move cars. You know, you don't know what Miss Phillips is gonna do when she's in front of you, but when she sees a big red truck, she's either gonna slam on the brakes or she's gonna move to the left or right. And you get those, you know, a lot of people get aggravated with that. And it's true. It happens.
I'm sure they come from the Beatty's Ford Brown Mill area.
But we do get complaints like that, and we take care of them. I mean, I talk to the drivers to get their point of view, but at the same time, I think it's important if I get a citizen that emails me or, you know, phones a call, to have a conversation with them. And a lot of times I just work it out with them and make them understand what they were trying to do, and it has nothing to do with their driving technique. It's just, you know, a lot of times they just get scared. I get scared too. I tell my daughter all the time, who's a young driver, I said, you know, this is what you gotta do when they coming up on behind you. So.
Well,
those
Chief,
guys.
I just want to say thank you to you and the people that you manage. I think you're doing a great job. And if you ever come to my house and need assistance, I want to see your face or John Stroop's face.
Yeah, down through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And,
Commissioner Bales, wait for the microphone first.
thank you. So Chief, we've had this conversation for a number of years, right? And for me, I'm waiting for you to say it's time.
Sure.
So whenever you get there, we'll be here to move forward with that. But I think that at this point, if you've got the staffing and you've got the experience and you're able to take care of our community, then I'm fine to leave this as is until it's deemed necessary. And I want to also say thank you. You and your staff have always been there for this community. I know you'll always be here for this community. And it's comforting to know that you're there when we need you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. And, you know, I know the next commissioner, I'm sure, has a great question. But this is really going to be based upon you, how fast you want to build it up to the 28 people. I mean, like I said, right now I wouldn't fix anything that's not broken. If you want to do it every other year, it's going to take 20 years to get to 28. I mean, if you want to do it every year, get to 28. But you got to build the team up first. Once you get the team, and then we can start doing some kind of hiring process and stuff like that. But if there's more important stuff on the agenda, well, this is probably the last thing you probably need to, you know, support right now. As long as you keep supporting the current, what we got going on, we're replacing fire trucks, and the calls are getting answered, and we're looking for fire stations for the future. I think we got our nuts and bolts right where we need to be.
Commissioner Munger?
Sure. Great presentation, really informative, really appreciate it. Just a kind of a general question. Have the firefighters in your department been vaccinated at this point? Is it 100%? Where are you at on that?
So I was probably the first guinea pig through the line. You know, you always send
He's
in.
still standing, but he lost
Yeah,
all
I'm
his
still
hair.
standing, you know, with this, had a sore arm for a couple days. I would say it's 50% now. It was 50% because we had a lot of younger firefighters, which most of them are in their 20s, because that's where they need to be, 20 to 30. You know, they were worried about being chipped from the government and where they were going to be tracked and stuff like that. But it's crazy. But the biggest thing was when I would tell them, hey, you were around Jackie who got COVID, I'm just going to use you for example. And not that you have COVID. But if you were around Jackie and you got quarantined now for 14 days, well, that's 14 days I don't get paid. I know, but you got to see if you get COVID. That's the whole thing. Now the CDC has changed that for us. Now, if we get vaccinated and I'm around Jackie and she had COVID, high five and hope you get better, but I don't have to be quarantined no more because my vaccination is part of it. That's what the CDC is telling us. So I think you'll see that number, Lance, go up from that 50% to the next group, and which is good because we just go down to the medic headquarters and get our vaccinations. Right. Right. That 50 actually got it, 50% got it. So we're halfway through. And it does help that, you know, city of Charlotte's got vaccinations going on. I was approached the other day by the Emergency Operations Center to see if even the fire department wanted to start doing vaccinations. I don't know about that part. I'd rather have a nurse or somebody else, but we'll go down that road when the general public, really starts kicking into this part. And I'll definitely inform y'all, because if we gonna use a fire station, you own the fire stations. I don't wanna go out there and say, oh my God, we're gonna use the fire stations. Well, there might be insurance problems and stuff like that. So if I ever hear about that, I just wanna throw it out there, but 50%.
You can share that Bill Gates has assured us that he'll only track during daylight hours.
I think there's one more slide. You got anything?
I'll wait till he's done.
No.
Well, mine's not even related to anything that we've talked about yet. Do you see ever a need in Huntersville for a dog like Cat in Charlotte? I met Cat at the EMS. I'm obsessed with her. And I didn't know if that was something that you guys had ever considered up here for now or the future.
Maybe the future, once you have your own, and no one's related or working for Charlotte or Concord, because that service is offered throughout the whole county. And us being so heavily used with Charlotte or our firefighters, they have access to that.
Okay.
And just like they had K9 units and stuff like that sniff out gas during, we have those resources. It's more of a regional thing or a county thing than anything. So if I needed the dog or if I needed the K9 to come smoke for gas because the chief thought it was arson or anything like that, those resources are available. to
Okay,
come up here.
awesome.
Commissioner Phillips, can you update me on what a cat does? Is it like an animal cat?
Her name is Cat, and she's a dog, and Melinda and I met her
Okay.
at the emergency management. And what she does is she's emotional support for firefighters, and she is incredible, absolutely incredible. And she is 100% funded by donations, so it's zero tax dollars, which makes her even more amazing.
I'd really be interested to see if a cat went into a fire. That's very interesting to me. So,
Cats
thank
come
you
to
for
your station to
clarification.
support you.
I should have just let you wonder.
I know it's not, I'm not sure if every other person that you're gonna see is telling you what they're gonna request this year or asking. This is the only increase we're gonna ask for, nothing to do with staffing or anything, $150,000. I showed you that chart of the fire apparatus replacements. That hundreds of thousands are turning into millions, and the only way, to get those fire trucks replaced is to obviously raise the capital improvement part. We also use capital improvement for anything that has to be done around the stations as far as the large upgrades. A couple years, I think a year or two ago, most of you came out and seen the cracked floor, the concrete that was damaged. We used the capital improvement money for that. It's just large upgrades. Last year, we did the heating and air conditioning systems at Station 1. We get the full use out of something. I'm not gonna lie to you. Buildings that are built in 1993, and we just upgrade the heat and air, well, it served its purpose and went its course. But the only way to keep up with the rising costs of the fire apparatus is to make sure that there's capital improvement money so you can lay it down on that truck to keep the same payment. So I don't think $150,000 is, I'm not sure what everybody else is asking for this year. This is probably the lowest I have ever asked for since my term as chief. I used to also do the budget for even Chief Irvin, and I don't even remember asking for anything more than that. But we don't need really anything right now but to keep up with the growing costs, if you can understand that, I'm sure.
We heard Chief Hoyle was gonna ask actually for less.
Was it?
Well, but the great thing about your budget from last year to this year, you just copy and paste. So that's
Basically
pretty
just
nice.
one item, yeah. Right. And Ms. Phillips, I wanted to address something with you because you had asked me this last year. I think we were only, maybe the only, I'm not sure, I'll say the only department that didn't ask for an electrical increase in our budget. And the reason I didn't do that is because when the fire trucks don't run as many calls, that fuel cost basically traveled over to the electrical costs. Now, if next year's budget, and I see, oh my God, we can't keep up, we're back to normal, and the electric bills have gone up through the roof, well, you might see an increase then, but that was the only reason I didn't do it.
All right.
Chief, I just have one question, it's not related to this, but thank you. Station 4, we have excess land I know years ago we talked about putting a training center, doing something there. Do we have current plans? Do you have any current plans for that?
They would love to make a training center, on the existing land. You know, and this is where the future is of, we have to train people to do that. And when they finally become, firefighters and they're gonna need an area to train, I think we sit on it until the time comes that we have built that team up to where we're starting to hire, and Huntersville Fire Department's gonna be Huntersville Town and Huntersville Fire Department employees. At least you have that part of the land to do what you need to do. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right now, all of our training, it's run through the college, CPCC. Every class that we take goes through CPCC. And I'm sure getting CPCC involved and to buy some of that training props and stuff like that, they would probably also contribute. Here, you're coming in with the land. If it's got to be run through the college anyway, let them, contribute.
So, thank you.
I'll just say one more time, thanks for all that you guys do, guys and girls do for the town and being part of our one town, one team.
I appreciate it. We enjoy what we do. We wouldn't be here if we didn't. It's not about, a lot of times about money or anything like that. But we're here to serve you, and we hope we do a good job. And the doors are always open, you know that. As long as you walk in with your mask right now, we'll sit there and talk. But stop at any of the 4 fire stations, and, they're always happy to talk to anyway.
All right, well, thank you for that. It's hopefully a calm year going forward, we hope.
Yeah, that's right.
But great job.
Thank you. I hope my presentation was a lot better than the next person. I'm better dressed.
But just break for about 5 minutes, since we're 13 minutes.
You got a little friendly competition going on there between the chiefs?
I just want to look better than him. He's a great guy.
life, but I don't know. These- Yeah. I like hard candy, but that one, what a what?
And then you and I can sort of jump in as we need to. So, Mayor, Laura and Jackie and I are gonna tackle sort of the first part of it, because there's step plan and things like that in there. And then the chief's gonna come in when you get into more meat and potatoes.
I think Chief totally said something about the person coming next. I was really hoping somebody else was going before me, but, I don't know. So, we're gonna talk about the step plan, something that has come up in previous discussions. This goes through all of the presentation. So, one thing that we just wanted to go through quickly is what is a step plan? How is it different than what we have currently? So we work off of merit system right now, and increases are based on performance. And when a merit, when we've gone back and forth between COLA merit traditionally, whenever it is a merit year approved in the budget, employees are evaluated based on the performance standards, and if they're exceptional, they might get a higher percentage in their increase, and if they are underperforming, they would get a lower percentage. So what a step plan does is takes out that variant in what kind of amount you would get. It is predetermined steps, obviously, through the pay plan, still based on performance. You can't be a non-performer. But it's more of a yes or no. You've met performance standards or you haven't met performance standards. And beyond that, then, what we look at for how we establish the step plan is part of the discussion. While you have a set number of steps, what are they based on? So it could be years to midpoint, it could be years to maximum, it could be based on a variety of things. And they don't necessarily have to be the same amount. We've talked about, you know, if the intent is to bring people to midpoint faster, then you're going to have bigger steps at the front end of your pay plan than you would at the back end. So if all you're looking at is time and position, then you might just have equal steps all the way through. So those are some of the considerations when you're thinking about a step plan.
When I want you to see on this slide, when I see this slide, the things that stick out to me are the last 3 bullet points. By percentage or amount, varied steps. What I hear when I listen to what Laura called other agencies and found out is I don't think there's two different localities that have exactly the same step plan. So people have designed their own, municipalities have designed their own unique step plan. So it's not like there's one massive, this is exactly the way you do it. Maybe you do your steps by percentage, or $2,000 between each step. Or how much is it? Do you do it faster to midpoint? There is no one design. People design theirs however they want it.
And the other thing that is not built into the step plan that we have talked about over the years is that cost of living adjustment. And as we go through the next slide, some people do include that each year that everybody else gets it, some people don't. So the step plan is just focusing on here's your starting point and here's how you progress through that range.
And so just to be clear on what she just said, there are places who say, we'll move you by the step, but we'll also change the step by the amount of the cost of living adjustment that year. So there could be 2 increases. There's no one size fits all. Some places do that, some places don't.
So what we did was an informal survey of the top 20 municipalities, one of which of course is us, just to see who has step plans and who doesn't. In that survey, 6 that are noted here do use a step plan. The two others, one just by looking at their website, I think does not, but I can't verify that. I haven't been able to verify that, so, and like Jackie stated, none of them are the same. So some have 5 steps, some have 10 steps, some have 15 steps. Another piece that's not on this slide is how many grades of officers they have. So we have a police officer 1, a senior, and a master. Some places only have a police officer 1, some have a police officer 1 and a corporal, which is a different progression as far as, say, a career ladder. Of the 6 who have a step plan, 4 use a percentage basis, and of those, I think 3 have a consistent amount where it's 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%, or 2.5%, whatever the percentage is, it's a set amount all the way through, and then 2 of them had some variation. So, as, like I said before, if you're looking to move people quickly through the steps, there were higher amounts at the beginning, and then it tapered down. 2 use a dollar amount, so instead of saying you get 5% between these steps, it's $500 or $1,750 between each step. Now, if you think about that in percentage, obviously the higher up you go in the range, the less percentage you're getting with that plan. The other thing that I asked about is how many levels, oh, sorry.
I just have a quick question. You did say that with some of the municipalities, they gave COLA was in addition to?
Yes.
Okay. And then my other question is, using the example, if you've got, you know, 5% for 5 years and then it drops to, let's say, 2 or 2.5, have there been any issues with staffing at that point? Are there concerns once that step drops?
So one thing that I didn't talk about yesterday, and Chief may talk about it a little bit today, when we look at our turnover, the majority of people that leave our organization have less than 5 years in our organization. And so I'm gonna say, generally speaking, because we know people are going to leave within that period, that is the purpose, the incentive for having a larger amount on the front end than the back end. And if you're thinking about what is the purpose of a pay plan and what is the rationale behind a midpoint, it is you are completely qualified to do your job. And so as officers are trained and move along, once they've been here a certain amount of years, we feel fairly confident that they're able to do what they need to do. And there's not as much investment as far as trying to keep them here. And I mean, obviously there's still a whole lot of investment to keep them here. But that's where you taper it down, because if you move them all the way through, they're gonna hit the top. And then what do you do?
Right. The other question that I have for you is, you haven't mentioned anywhere merit. So if we do a step plan, merit is then just taken off the table for policing?
So one organization, and I don't remember off the top of my head right now, once employees got to the top of the range, then they would be eligible for the merit at the top of the range. So it wouldn't be a combination through the years until they hit the maximum, and then once they hit the maximum, rather than saying you don't get anything anymore, they carried over into
Flipped it.
merits.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So of the survey, did any of the top 20 municipalities, were they on the step plan and stopped using the step plan?
Yes. So Raleigh has had a step plan and has moved away from a step plan. And part of their rationale, a step plan is a very rigid plan. And so they moved away to have more flexibility.
Thank you.
Did they move to a system that was consistent with the rest of the city?
You know, I don't know that I asked that question. It's similar. So similar to how we are, you have a range, and your merit is within that range. And so they moved to a range, just a straight range and merit system. I believe that's consistent with what they do across the board, but I don't know for certain.
That's fine. It just might be interesting, maybe they moved to some kind of modification, but not consistent with the rest of the city of Raleigh.
I can double check that.
Okay.
Did, I know that you just got response from the top 20 municipalities. Did the League of Municipalities, anybody that fell outside of the top 20, have you found out, were they on the step plan, and did they go off the step plan and why?
So I looked at people around us, Cornelius, Davidson, Statesville, Salisbury, and none of them report having a step plan. And Jackie, you may remember this. I know we've looked at that before. Over the years, the league has done a survey, and I don't know that we have the information of who has moved away from a step plan. I believe others have moved away, and some have moved to a step plan. So it's a little bit of both.
I put on the manager's listserv, hey, do you have a step plan? If you do, I'd like to talk to you about it. And a smaller municipality indicated they did have one. I think I got 3 responses. I don't even remember who it was. It's been several months. But there was a appreciably smaller municipality who said, yes, we have a step plan.
Thank you.
Yes.
Laura, are you going to talk about compression anytime during this presentation?
I think Chief is addressing that.
Okay. And you said that Raleigh switched out of the step plans because they wanted to be more flexible. Is that the law enforcement officers wanted to be more flexible, or the town government?
I did not ask that specifically. And I know that they are doing a phase out of that process, I think probably to deal with some of the things like you mentioned, compression. Again, I can follow up on that.
Yeah, it's called a living wage plan. I have it right here. But it was to allow flexibility, similar to what y'all are doing. We don't have a living wage plan, but a flexibility to be able to adjust in times like COVID, et cetera. You know, one year we may do 5%. We may throw on top and do some lateral incentives. We may do some other things that you throw money at issues that we got addressed because, and y'all have been very flexible over the last couple of years because we've had issues. I think, Mr. Boone, you brought up when we were looking at FY18, and we saw so much turnover, where the board over those years has really stepped up the game to help, and you'll see how it affected turnovers because we were almost, I think we were full, Chief and I were having a discussion. God, I'm trying to remember when he was talking about, you think we can overhire? I was about to fall out of my seat because we never got to that point. And then all of a sudden, ultimately at the time, we've got to 99, and you'll see some of this. Literally, the wheels started to fall off. We had retirements, and you had COVID, you had George Floyd, you had all these things sort of happening at that time to hit FY21. But you'll see in his presentation, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, we've hired 8 folks off the lateral program. So these flexible things that you allowed us to do really allowed us to, make a home run. But we're at a different time now. But we can give you more information on the Raleigh plan. I've got it here, and I'll look at it real quick, see if I can give you some more information.
I get anxious and want to share details. You've had 102 authorized sworn positions for a number of years in the budget, and July, August of 2020, you were at 99 either sworn or in BLET positions. So 99 of 102, we were getting super close 6 months ago to full staff, which was exciting.
Any more, do you have any more?
No,
comments?
the only last point on there was just how many included the step plan at higher levels, police officer, sergeants, lieutenants, captains. The majority were just police officers, well, I guess, and sergeant, the captain and lieutenant above those typically are not included in the step plan.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Laura, will you advance that one more slide for me, please, ma'am? So, as Chief Detoli pointed out, and Chief Hoyle will tell you, we compete in a market that is close to Charlotte, and so there is a natural desire to know how we compare in salary to Charlotte. And Charlotte has step plans. And we have a list of employees and how many years of service our sworn staff have in law enforcement to Huntersville, and how many total years they have in law enforcement. And so when we take that total number of years in law enforcement and compare that to what somebody would make on the Charlotte step plan, Charlotte uses step plans for officers and for sergeants. My understanding is they do not use a step plan. At that point, they convert to a more merit traditional system for their lieutenants and above. And so if somebody who likes math takes the number of sworn years of service somebody has and says, what would this person at this number of years of service make on the Charlotte step plan? That's fairly easy to do for the officers. It's fairly easy to do for the sergeants. If we did that, every single sergeant that we have on the Charlotte step plan would make more than our lieutenants. So you got to make an assumption of what we pay our lieutenants. And once you make that assumption about lieutenants, then you got to apply that with captains and the major. And so our estimate of what our sworn staff would make on Charlotte's step plan is approximately $1.3 million more than we're currently paying. When I look at that, I compare that. We received a lot of information about 3 years ago from our sworn staff about what it would cost to convert the Charlotte step plan, and that's fairly consistent with the numbers they came up with 3 years ago. That is not necessarily me saying Charlotte is the perfect plan. In fact, if anything, it's me saying Charlotte's done something unique, but we're naive not to recognize that we're competing for officers with people who are near to us. Okay, so when I said, here's the math, Charlotte also offers incentives. A very popular one I know off the top of my head that is completely different is what we do for educational incentives. If you have a bachelor's degree here, we give you 5% more than a 5% increase in pay. Charlotte offers a 10. So when I calculate its ballpark $1.3 million difference, I did not apply the incentives on top of those steps. Let's start over here. Commissioner Boone, you had a question?
Right, you're comparing this 1.3 million, Charlotte, to bring us up to them. Does Charlotte law enforcement have the same type of retirement that Huntersville does?
Charlotte law enforcement participates in the same retirement system we do. Charlotte firefighters have their own unique retirement system.
It's managed by the same entity.
Yes, ma'am.
So would the 1.3 million just be like a one-time cost to get us where we need to be, and then we increase every year?
1.3 would be an add to salary, and that would be an add to gross. And so the next year, if we're going to advance people through to the next step, it's not like we're going to go back to we're not going to eliminate the step system. It's an add to salary from this point forward.
Now, Jack, I was gonna piggyback on that, and I saw you, Mr. Wallace. On the, did you add in positions that we're already down also on the 1.3?
I applied that to our existing workforce, and so theoretically, we've got those 10, 11 vacant positions. Are we gonna hire somebody with 2 years of service, or 5 years of service, or no years of service? I don't know, so I couldn't apply it to, I could have made a ballpark guess and say we're gonna hire people, those vacant positions at an average of 2 years of service, but I just assumed we'd hire them at minimum pay.
So,
That $1.3 million is a estimate. Estimate's best we can do. Yes, sir.
so I know the incentive programs are a little different in Huntersville versus Charlotte. How about our benefits program, health? My understanding is we have a better benefits program. Is that true or not true anymore?
Today, we pay 100% of the cost of employee-only health insurance. I am not an expert on Charlotte's plan. I will tell you, water cooler talk, I have heard that they have, I'm not confident they pay 100% of employee-only cost, and my understanding is their participation in wellness programs that can reduce the employee contribution toward health insurance. The state requires a 5% 401k contribution for all sworn law, so that's going to be completely comparable. The retirement system is comparable. Everybody pays in 6%. Those will be some of the larger benefits.
Thank you.
Last question for Laura. The towns our size, we're talking about steps, are there any that have bands, pay bands?
What do you mean?
Like a range, like a PO1 would be range from a starting salary to this. If you get promoted, you would have a band or a range to pay.
Without a step plan?
Without, you take step, the bands, there's two types of plans really, or three, steps, bands, and living wage. Do you know of any towns our size that have bands,
Yes.
pay bands?
Yeah, so in looking at the top 20, now I know some of those are larger than this, but most that do not have a step plan have bands.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify on the Raleigh, and this is, they still have different pay plans for so for police and for fire and for all other employees, similar to how we used to have the police on a different scale than all other employees.
Commissioner Munger, did you have a question?
I did. On the benefits, you said that we pay 100% of employee cost. Is that standard in all municipalities?
The League of Municipalities puts out a survey, and I'm afraid to comment. It's fairly common in local government for local governments to pay 100% of employee-only coverage. It's very frequent for you to be required to have a physical to qualify for that employee-only coverage once a year, or required participation in a wellness program, maybe a smoking cessation program. There are places that pay 100% of employee-only coverage. There are places that require you to ante up $20 bi-weekly. It's across the board. It is common for it to be 100% employee-only paid, but it's common for there to be a small contribution from the employees as well. Is that fair, Laura?
Okay.
Okay, Chief?
Mayor, just only thing I wanted to say, to add to that is, the reason this is here is, obviously one of the goals you want us to bring back more information was discuss STEP program options. So we wanted to make sure obviously the ladies here did the homework and brought that back to you, and we figured the best thing to do is let's just pick Charlotte and see what it would take to get us in that, sort of program, what the cost would be. So that's what you see before you already.
It's our favorite yearly topic.
Yes.
I've already filed a grievance about this process. I have to follow the most handsome guy that works for the town. Every year it seems like I have to follow him, and he heckles me a lot. No, truly, best relationship I've ever had with the fire department. They're just awesome. I got to tell you, great people, and they work with us so well. So I'm going to present a big number to you today, and I'm going to tell you that it's not my preferred number. I think we're trying to keep up with what we can keep up with. I'll be glad to explain that at the end, but this really, even though it's a big number, I'm trying to get us to a point to where, we're able to answer calls, we're able to keep people, and I don't know that this number is going to bring in a ton of people, or it's going to bring in, it's going to keep a ton of people, but I think it's going to be competitive. And as you see, for example, you heard Jack mentioned and others mentioned today that we had 3,000 people in 4 months moving to town. Well, if you put that into perspective about what our officer to citizens population ratios are, we should have hired 6 people when that happened. I can't hire 6 people. I've got 10 vacancies. So, you know, we've really got to change the way we look at this, and it's unprecedented times. I hadn't seen it. This is my, oh, I hate to tell this, but it's almost 30 years. 25, 26 years as a police chief. And I've never seen anything like this. It's unprecedented times, and I've met with all our local chiefs, and we're discussing this, and we're all in the same boat. You know, it's just a very competitive time. People do not want to be a law enforcement officer right now. And we got to figure out what we can do to encourage people to do this job. It's a great job, I'm telling you. If I had everything to do over, if I was starting back tomorrow, I'd do exactly the same thing. And I think the people that stay in it a long time think the same way. They're not deterred by this, the ones that stayed a long time, but we've got that group that it's a tough adjustment when you get in, and we got to focus on getting people in and staying people in. So there's far less people wanting to be police officers, and far more that's getting out of law enforcement. We've lost 6 people to the private sector in 18 months. We've lost about the equal number to municipalities, but even the private sector is the largest of the sector. So we're competing on a bigger platform. So what makes this more impactful for us is we have a lower than average staff in both civilian and sworn employees. I'll show you that in a minute. We have a high number of retirements recently, and more is coming this year. The private sector employment's been very strong. So I had planned for the last couple years to ask you for a multi-year increase in staffing, and you'll see some numbers in a minute on why. But we have some really critical positions, like we don't have a dedicated training coordinator. For an agency our size, that's not good. Now we're doing training coordination, but we're doing it using who's available to do it here and who's available to do it now, but not somebody dedicated to the most expensive piece of human resources that we have is how much we spend on training. We're short 1 captain position. We have 3 bureaus, 2 captains. Every patrol shift needs additional personnel as well as detectives. But they're not possible because they're slow to fill. We must change the way we think about compensation to meet supply and demand. We must also utilize non-sworn positions. So I want you to look at, this is a survey, you see the agencies up there, of sworn ratio. This is your same ratio you see. You take your population, you divide it by 1,000. So this is the number of officers per 1,000 residents, is what this is. It's kind of industry standard. So you'll see 2.15 is the average of all those agencies. And we're at 1.55. Now that was prior to 3,000 people moving into town, right? And that's also assuming full staff. I don't include the 10 vacancies. So my point is, when we have vacancies, it has a much higher impact on us because we're already lean. We're already very lean. And 2.15 officers per 1,000, do the math on 3,000 new residents in 4 months. That's 7 officers. 6.5, 6.4. So 7 officers that we should hire because of those 3,000 people. So even though we're at 1.5 and we're low, the lowest of this list except for Mint Hill, we're dropping. We're still dropping. So this is an issue for us, and it gets to a point to where, we had officers that were, I cut out a lot of overtime when I first got here. Of course, that overtime's creeping back in now, as you can imagine, because we're short. And what officers are worried about, in addition to pay and the competitive nature of our salary structure with other agencies, is quality of life. They can't plan that every other weekend off like they used to, because they might have to come to work. Time off has to be planned in advance if it's guaranteed. So it does become a quality of life issue when you start losing staff and gaining population at the same time, when you were already lean to begin with. So I just want to put that in perspective as we move on. So according to this survey, which was done, a few months ago, we need 39 new officers from our full-time, fully staffed number to equal that same ratio. And just as significant is we would need 16 new civilian positions to equal the same ratio of non-dispatched civilians. So we have a lot of sworn officers doing administrative work. Our administrative division, the whole bureau that takes care of all our training, our fleet maintenance, our contracts, project management, does not have a single administrative assistant assigned to it. And there's a lot of other things I'll show you as far as civilian staff that we could be doing, that we should be doing. But we need to leverage that historical lack of civilian employees as much as we can. So, recruiting initiatives, we've got a few projects underway. Targeted advertising, we're developing new advertising models to highlight the strong support of our community. And we're going to target those ads toward agencies that don't get that support. I mean, we may have billboards in Portland, I don't know, We will also target universities, specifically criminal justice programs. Somebody Googles police jobs and they're near the university, they may get an ad for Huntersville. So we're working on that now. That's in process. We're actually going to create a dedicated recruiting page. Thank you very much. Do I look like I'm sweating? We're going to have a dedicated recruiting landing page. We're going to rebrand. We've got a company that's doing that work for us. We're looking for ways to streamline our hiring process. Typically, it takes months, 6, 7 months. It's a arduous process to be hired here. Same with most agencies, because we are very picky, and we're trying to streamline that process. Again, civilian positions to help with background investigations is the fastest way to streamline that process. Yes, sir.
How do we streamline that process without degrading the quality of people we hire?
Well, you can't go to that level to where we're not still screening. We are still screening. We do when you come in here, you have several review boards you go through, and we pull officers in from the streets, and you go through an interview process 3 or 4 different times. And in the process of that, there's also background investigations going on. We try to do background investigations on site. So if you worked at Atlanta Police Department, we're going to Atlanta to try to interview people, and from that person, we're going to try to interview the next person, right? So we're going to try to get into details. But we can streamline that into being able to get that background work a lot faster. And that's where our difficulty is, because we don't have anybody assigned to that. We don't have dedicated staff for that. The recruiter is also the background investigator. So while there's background investigation on, recruiting's not going on, right? So that's what I mean by streamline. We're not going to get it down to 2 weeks. We're not. We are trying to interview. We did a lot of screening before we interviewed before. So maybe, we're talking about maybe interviewing basically anybody, and then doing the screening after that, so we can kind of get a feel for it. One of them was joking that if you can fog up a mirror, we'll interview you. But it is getting to a point where all the agencies, and I've talked to all the chiefs about it, we're all considering changing standards a little bit. I mean, you got to be realistic about the difficulties we're having. But we'll never change the standards to the level of integrity, honesty, things like that. We'll also be paying salaries to more entry-level candidates to attend basic training. That's something that's fairly new. We have a number of those that we're paying. Normally, you hire somebody after the academy. We had one local community college academy that will only put people that's pre-hired into their programs. Because of COVID, they were trying to limit the number And I told them, I said, well, if you have anybody that's not hired that you're not gonna let in, send them to me. I may hire them before, you know, you can get there. And in those cases, we may not do complete backgrounds while they're in school. You know, we do the backgrounds while they're in school. And that's okay as long as we get it done before they get out. So these changes are likely not to solve our total recruiting problem. We have to rethink our compensation too. So I want to talk about leveraging civilian positions a while, because this is one of the areas that we're really not utilizing civilian positions the way we should. We have a lot of officers. I noticed it when I got here. That's just doing administrative work, typing letters to people, you know, doing things that really sworn officers shouldn't be doing. So, crime scene technicians, our police officers on the street do all our crime scene work. So they're responsible for their own crime scenes of their own crimes. Now think about that a minute. Crime scene takes 5 or 10 times the amount of time it does to actual answer the call and go to the next call. So you've got people doing that. The other issue I have with that is our crime scene technicians are generalists, right? They can't focus 100% of their effort on the newest and latest and greatest crime scene techniques, because they're generalists. They have to go to the next call and do a lot of other things. And it really doesn't make sense that at agency our size we don't have non-sworn, dedicated crime scene people. When you see a trial in court, you see the officer up on the stand for an hour. You see the crime scene examiner on there for 3 days. You know, it makes sense that we need to specialize that. Our sworn officers do all the permits, the quartermaster, that's the equipment, ordering equipment, things like that. Public information officer, backgrounds, reports to various regulatory bodies, and many more things that all done by sworn officers. Most of these tasks are distributed over many officers. So if we hire civilians, we're not necessarily going to put people on the street, because these same people are wearing a lot of hats. But they're going to be able to focus more on law enforcement specific things. Our comparative analysis shows we're 16 less civilian positions than comparable agencies. And if we leverage just half of those, we're going to greatly improve our ability to deliver services. But we're also going to do things like keep the police department open 24/7, which has always been something that we've talked about. So I'll go over those specific ones in a minute. So unlike sworn, the job market for civilian positions is very good. So we had, I think, 200 applicants for our crime analyst. Our crime analyst who recently started, she's awesome. She came from Denver, Colorado Police Department as a full-time crime analyst. She has 10 years experience, and she's changing the game about the kind of information we're getting. And y'all have seen some of those reports, you'll see more of them. So the job market's very good for any civilian position. We have 200 or 300 applicants for them. We can leverage this, reduce the impact of current staffing shortages. Again, it's not always going to translate to an officer on the street. Now, one of these will, but it's going to help improve the efficiency of what they do. So let's talk about civilian positions as records personnel. We're talking about 5 people here, so it's not like a records clerk. You're talking about a 24/7 function that includes call expediters. So they would work in the bubble at the police department. They would sit there it'd be a 24/7 thing. That's why the 5 people. But we're implementing probably March or April a way for residents to report crime online. We've been working on this for a year. So you'll be able to go on your computer, log on to a secure network. It's very easy. It's click stuff through a browser. And you'll be able to report things where the police department's not needed to be there. Now, you don't have to. You can call the police and we'll come out. But if you wanted to report, somebody stole a ring and you don't remember when, there's no crime scene or anything like that, you can go online and report crimes. And it will come into our system. And this person working 24/7 would code that system and clean that report up and have it into our record system the next morning when detectives come in. So that would automate that process. We can still do that. It just takes a longer time. than this would be. They would also be DCI certified. That's just like dispatchers, where they can get on the DCI terminals, they can send administrative messages, they can send bolos out, be on the lookout. They can run tag numbers, they can do things. So, for example, they'll also have a radio and train to use a radio, just like a dispatcher. So when an officer goes to a call, let's say we have an underage drinking party, and we have 30 kids that are drinking, and they're all underage. The officer typically will sit in his car with a cell phone and call 30 parents and wait for them to get out there. It's an all-night thing when that happens. It really is. He could send all that information to this expediter, and that expediter will make all those phone calls and make that process happen. Same way if we go into an area where there's been, 10 cars broken into in one parking lot. Instead of that officer trying to track down the owners of all those cars, this person would do. So it's almost like a call support function. Officers will be able to call them, hey, can you run this tag? Can you contact this person? And that would be tremendously helpful. That would also keep the police department open 24/7. Got a domestic violence victim at 3 o'clock in the morning, they can come find a safe place. Right now, they have to come and make a phone call, and somebody has to go meet them there. So that would be a good thing. So assist officers, I just talked about all that.
Chief.
What?
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. Would that, I know we've, in the process of installing cameras around town, would this also be a function where they could
That's
monitor?
a great point. That's a great point. So as a call goes out, we're not going to monitor cameras 24/7. You can't do it. But as a call goes out, let's say it's in an area where we do have cameras, it's an armed robbery, 1 o'clock in the morning, whatever. That person could immediately get on that camera closest to it and start looking for information that would be of interest to the officers. What's unique about our camera system is with one click, you can send it to anybody. So that dispatcher could actually, I call them dispatchers, it's expediters. They could call back and say, hey, check the camera, see if you see anything here, see if you see anything there.
So similar to the way Real Time does it in Charlotte?
Exactly,
Okay,
like the
that'd be
crime
perfect.
center. It is. Now, I will tell you, Charlotte does a good job dispatching calls, but they have 2 million calls. So this extra stuff, like helping the officers, making them more efficient, doing things for them on the side, there's very limited what they can do there. They're going to the next call. They're usually not even familiar with the call. But you have somebody that takes the call, they send it to a dispatcher, and a dispatcher dispatches the call. So they're not really familiar with what's going on. They're just looking at computer screens. This person would be able to monitor what's going on and help the officers with those calls. That's the idea behind it. There's other agencies doing it. I'm going to be honest with you, the way I found out about it, and I've heard of it, but I really didn't know the details until my daughter went to work for a police department in Gaston County. After she got married, her husband works over there, and that's what she does. She's an expediter, 24/7. I thought, man, that's neat. I wish I'd have thought of that a long time ago. But that's, I checked around. There's a lot of agencies doing that.
And these are full-time positions or part-time?
They're full-time. They're full-time. That's why there's 5 of them. It's a lot of coverage, They would actually be on fixed shifts, probably working the front desk. So dedicated crime scene, just want to mention that again. Currently, our sworn officers do all the crime scene work, but properly trained certified civilians. I don't want you to think we're not doing good crime scene work. We are. If we have a major case, we've got detectives that's years of experience doing it can come in and doing it. But most of our crime scene work is done on, smaller stuff, like a series of car break-ins. Y'all may not know this, but we take DNA swabs of car break-ins. Why? Because it's getting faster and faster. How much we actually had a hit a couple weeks ago, it might have been a couple months ago now, I lose track of time, where we had done a swab on a simple car break-in, and we got a hit on it and solved dozens of them, So we do a lot of things that other agencies don't do, but our sworn officers are doing it. Quartermaster related, this is equipment, supplies, body-worn camera subpoena processing. You'd be shocked at how many times we get subpoenas for body-worn cameras, every court case. And we have to extract that from our evidence system in a way that's court acceptable, and a lot of subpoena stuff. Solicitation of permits, recruiting, assistant recruiter, and background investigations, all that's done by sworn personnel. Training coordinator, we don't have a training coordinator now. It's done by the captain over admin, but most of what our training is officers think about training. They think about something they want to do, they put in for it, and somebody makes a decision. That's not the way we should be approaching training. We should be approaching training about what our long-term goals are and career development and career paths, and make sure that people's going to training that's in their career path. If you have somebody on a patrol traffic enforcement career path, they shouldn't be going to homicide school, right? So I really think it's time we put a training coordinator in there. A lot of a training director has to be sworn, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the administrative work surrounding it does not have to be. Public information officer, currently our PIO is vacant. Well, it's not really vacant. She got promoted. She's now a patrol sergeant. She did an outstanding job at our PIO. You've seen some of the stats I sent you about the incredible amount of improvement in our ability for outreach. She did 90% of that, but she got promoted, so she's on the road now, and she's still helping us do some of that while she's on the road. So she may get tired of that soon. Animal control, currently 58% of our animal control calls occur when the animal control officer is not on duty. So, and maybe 3 or 4% of that we defer to Charlotte Medic. So 55% of all our animal control calls are answered by patrol officers who, that is a very specialized field. They don't have the expertise or equipment to deal with a lot of these calls, but they do the best they can with it. So that's an area where we could really see an increase in taking workload off.
So those animal control calls, Chief, are they dogs running on the loose? Are they
It
squirrels
runs the
in
gamut.
attic?
It runs the gamut from aggressive, vicious dogs to barking dogs. Police can't deal with barking dogs. We have enough trouble getting heroin possession cases tried in court. You just can't deal with barking dog stuff unless you have somebody to follow up and, write the warnings and the 30-day notices and things like that. But it runs the gamut from health and welfare, people abusing dogs and things like that, to, we've had some discussions around the puppy mills and the breeders. All that's animal control stuff, and it's very specialized. It's a different set of rules. Animal control laws are run out of the Department of Agriculture, not the Department of Justice. And if you ask an officer, what's the Department of Agriculture rule on this or that, they're going to say, I didn't even know it was in the Department of Agriculture. So they just kind of try to deal with it the best they can. And usually they'll push it off and try to hold it off until the animal control officer comes back in. But we're very large for one animal control officer, I tell you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So we've needed another animal control officer for honestly about 10 years. And I don't like spending money, but it's a fact. And just to kind of give you guys background, we had a nonprofit in our community that kind of worked congruent and kept HPD from having to get involved with stuff because they directly worked with certain populations, with animals. And that nonprofit, they stopped in 2020. So now HPD, I don't know how much it's impacted them, but from my world of volunteering with them over the years, they now don't have that community force to help them, and that's gonna probably increase more calls too. And, fun fact, more people adopted animals during COVID, so they're gonna run into more, barking dogs and kind of calls too, just on statistics.
So of all those positions I just talked to you about, that's an estimated number I put up there. I'm second guessing myself on the civilian crime scene technicians at this point. Too late to change it. But that's a very specialized certified position. That may be a little low, but it's still a big number. And I just wanted you to see what that was. That's leveraging half of those 16 positions that on average we don't have compared to other agencies. So I want to talk about. Yes,
Just,
sir.
I'm sorry.
No.
On the crime scene, you said that's not enough of them? I'm sorry, what were you saying about the CSI on the previous slide?
You were second guessing was the
I'm
number
second
low or
guessing
high?
the amount of money.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It's 40, I guesstimated 45,000
I got you.
for the salaries, and I guesstimated that. I'm not sure, you know, when I think back about it, somebody that's certified in latent evidence, it's somebody that's certified in fiber evidence. When you start adding those certifications up, I don't know whether 45 will get them, that's what I'm saying. You don't want to hire every one of them as entry level. You want somebody that's been doing it for 10 years. So it may be a little, it's not going to be that much different. So, was this your slide, Jackie? I can talk about it, I mean.
Either way, Jackie and me, you.
Go ahead.
All right. I'll stand up.
Dish that
I
right
know-
off then.
I know the mayor and Brian want to see my face, so I'm gonna stand up. So what this slide's all about is kind of, what have we been doing? What has the, mayor and board allowed us to do in the last few fiscal years? And you're gonna see numbers sort of tied to some of these things. So this just sort of gives you a snapshot, bullet points on that. So FY19 had a 4% increase for all employees. We did this is right when I came on, compression pay disparity adjustment of about 340,000. 79% of that went to Swan. If you recall, and it's hard to remember, I can't hardly remember yesterday, but the goal there was to push that money towards more of the police officers, down at the bottom end, and that's what we did. And we've got numbers, we can break that out even further, but as you can see, the majority of the money was to try to address some of this. We were having a lot of folks leaving, turnover, et cetera, and address some of the compression issues. We did raise the PO1 minimum salary, move from 38,700 to 42,680. I'm just rounding. FY20, what did we do? An average of that was a merit year, an average of 3.5% merit increase to all employees. We did. Some folks may call these steps. We actually put in place SPO and MPO steps, and what that allowed us to do, we were trying to get at some more of the issues of advancing folks, even though we don't have steps, but allowing folks to advance, and Chief can get more in the weeds if he wants to, allowing folks to advance quicker. So for instance, if you have, is it 5 and 10 years or 4
5
and 8?
and 10 plus X number of training hours.
So it allows you to advance quicker and obviously get more money, et cetera. And it gives folks a chance to advance up through, to various levels. And here on these SPO, MPO steps, it's based on qualification. Just doing that alone resulted in 18 officer promotions, which was great. And the lateral incentive program, if you recall, we did some lateral incentive program in FY20, and it had some major results. It had 8 new hires. So all that stuff, when we talk about flexibility, y'all allowing us to be flexible and the things that you allowed us to do to try to get at where we were, just couldn't fill the gaps. And then FY21, obviously hit COVID. We had many things happen in the nation. Don't need to rehash all that stuff. We only did a 2% increase, but obviously I understand, there are issues with folks being unemployed, et cetera. There was a 2% increase to all employees in July, a 1% increase to all employees in January. And then we did the one-time hazard pay of $1,050. This is for police in December. Obviously, we did some for other employees too. And then PO1 minimum salary moved from 42,681 to 43,971. Now, what I will tell you in FY21, some other places did more. If Chief is trying to play catch up, that hurts when we kind of, I understand reasons why we did it, but that hurts sometimes when we're trying to make up that gap. So if we're do a 2% or 1%, other folks do 4% or whatever, especially competitors that we're trying to compete against, then that makes, that causes issues, we get further behind the gap. That's all this is to just show you what you've done. You've been very flexible. We've done a good job to try to make up that, and we were literally right at the tip of the iceberg, and then all these things happened that,
Yeah, I think a good point of this is just how much you have done.
yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, You did what we asked you to do. It wasn't like you said, well, we're not gonna do what you want, but we'll do this. This is what we presented to you. So y'all done everything that we've asked you to do. And, you know, those eight new hires from lateral incentives, we had 6 officers receive recruiting bonuses for recruiting 6 of those 8 in. It's been very good, but the point is, everything's moving faster than, you know, the changes are moving faster. Charlotte did a mid-year change, December 20th. They changed their pay scales December 20th instead of waiting until July. So, you know, 4-year degree, you're 51 starting pay. You know, it's very competitive.
And that's really, I mean, all I had to say about this. And you may ask questions in a little bit, Chiefs, and keep going, but you may ask questions of, you know, who do we lose them to, you know, and which fiscal years, you know. I've got that information to talk about FY 19, 20, 21, so we can talk about that, but they're all over the board. It's not, you know, you're not gonna see we've lost a ton to Charlotte. We've lost some to Charlotte, yes, but I'd say we're probably losing more to the private sector and
State and
to
federal.
other government agencies like a DMV, a ABC, et cetera, et cetera. And there's probably many reasons. Fixed schedule.
Yeah,
to, you
that's
know,
been a big issue.
those kind of things like that. So I'll sit down and be quiet, but I'm sure you're gonna have questions, and we have the answers to that, and I'll let Chief keep going so we eat lunch
So I'm
by
gonna-
3 or 4 o'clock.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about this pay progression for an officer starting here, not being fast enough to offset their value. That gets to our point about where are we losing people. We mentioned 3 to 5 years. It's very clear why that's a big issue for us. I'll show you in a second. I just want to point out, this is not a presentation about how much money do our officers want. I'm not thinking, I mean, obviously they want all they can get. We all do. That's not what this presentation is about. It's about supply and demand. It's about the big picture of where we are nationwide in law enforcement and what we're trying to accomplish. We must motivate people to seek a career in law enforcement that's not thinking about it. They're not thinking about law enforcement. I mean, how do we get them to say, hey, that's worth doing? You know, it's difficult. Our pay progression must recognize officers gain experience with us. They're going to be aggressively recruited. I've done studies. I can tell you, this. I put $100,000 in there. I said may save $100,000. It's over 100. But they'll save $100,000 by recruiting an officer with 5 years' experience because they're already trained and certified. The cost of bringing that officer on, training him up, the liability we take during his first 1 or 2 years of service is a lot. You got to think about your own kids the day they graduated from college. What have they experienced in life? Have they experienced a violent domestic violence incident where they had to be the referee? No. You know, aggressive people that you stop for drinking and driving that want to fight? Probably not. It takes a long time to get them through that. And just because they're certified and they're wearing the same uniform I got on does not mean they're experienced. And it takes a while. And we spend a lot of time training them, and that costs money. It costs a lot of money. These current pay ranges we've got, and Jackie pointed this out during our discussions of this, this really illustrates a lot of it. So our police officer 1 salary is currently $49,154 average. And if you look at the midpoint of that range, it's well below the midpoint. Now that makes sense in a lot of ways because they're younger officers coming in. All the other ranges, you'll look that the averages are very close and in some cases higher.
Nobody likes this slide as good as me because there's so many numbers on it. I thought get this slide in here. For police officer 1, our range starts at 43 and it ends at 69. The midpoint, the middle of that range is 56. So if you add up all of our 28 officers, but with less than 1 to up to 6 years of service, we're paying an average of $49,000. Anthony talked about the senior police officer range. Theoretically, is it 4 years of service, Chief? So 5 years of service, a police officer qualified. That's the earliest point you can be a senior police officer. So a senior police officer ranges between 46 and 74. we're paying our 24 senior police officers 58. 58 compared to 60, that's not terribly far from the midpoint. Master police officer ranges 49 to 78. We're paying 68, well above that average of 68. Think about it. Theoretically, you don't want your PO1 to stay there long enough to get to the top of the range, but if we start people closer to the bottom of that range at 43, it's a whole lot easier for one of our competitors to pick them off at 46 or 47 or 48. And so the chief's next slide is going to talk to you about training. Save those training dollars by paying people a little bit more, getting them quicker to midpoint to make them more expensive to be picked away.
So this is your outgoing money chart, basically. We know how much it costs to bring somebody on. This is including the recruiting cost, the advertising cost divided by the number of people we recruit, right? The cost of training officers' salary while they're training these individuals, the cost of their salary, because if they're not answering calls, it's training costs, right? And we know what that number is. We can predict it. You know, the first year around 60,000, 10,000 the next year, and then it tapers off from there. There's still training costs because we've got annual in-service recurring training. But where these agencies have figured it out, like Charlotte and other agencies, if they come in and hire one of our officers at year 3, they're not spending that $100,000. You know why? It's the same training. Radar certification is the same for everybody. Intoxilizer certification is the same for everybody. Active shooter training is the same for everybody. It's done by the state. So they're not having to spend all that money to certify officers that we spent to certify. In addition to that, the difference between a 0-year officer, I've already alluded to this, and a 5-year officer is night and day. Somebody that's been here 5 years has been through a lot. They've seen a lot. They've been traumatized by what they've seen, and they've dealt with it. The difference between a 5 and 10-year officer, not so much. The 10-year officer is definitely more seasoned. He's definitely seen more. But the disparity between a 5 and a 10 is not like the disparity between a 0 and a 5. Yet our pay system is consistent all the way through. So what we're proposing is we acknowledge that we need to escalate the entry level. Now, when I say entry level, this is experience level. It doesn't mean if a person comes in with 5 years experience here that we should escalate them for the first 5 years. That's not what it means, because we're picking them just like other people's picking from us. We're sniping them off. But it's the people that come in with the 0 years experience that we need to escalate. So it does create some compression between the 0 and 5-year person, because you're escalating them faster. It does. But when we implement this, we have to deal with that compression up front. And that's why this is expensive. And I'll show you that in a second. I'm going to show you a chart at the very end that kind of illustrates, despite the money I'm doing, you'll be able to see the pretty modest move that we're making. So what's the right formula? Entry-level salaries have to increase by significant amounts to get people to do this job. Once a person is hired, they must be compensated faster as their experience grows. This is where I mentioned the first 5 years and the difference between a 0 and 5. The skill set involved, the pay has to evolve with the skill set. The learning curve, basically. We must compensate entry-level officers rapidly as they gain experience. So there are challenges with this. First, it's expensive. Dealing with compression alone costs a lot of money. The worst thing you could do is give me everything I want at the low end, and all of a sudden you've got officers with 5 years experience making the same as officers with 10 years experience. That is not the right way to go. Yes, sir.
So just for clarification, when we're talking about somebody with 0 years and somebody with 5, if somebody were to come from an outside agency to Huntersville, can't remember what you call it now, a PO2, would they automatically, most likely go in the PO2 slot? That'd be where they'd be hired?
They could. They could certainly go in at that rate of pay. But their training, our required training, which may be a little different than what they've received in other agencies, would have to be met.
Okay.
But yeah, we would hire people in calculating it based on 0 to whatever year experience they got, so that there's equity there.
Right, okay.
That's where we get more competitive in the lateral market too. Not everybody's gonna like this plan, I can tell you. Entry-level recruits will increase more rapidly the first few years than other staff, but we're trying to deal with the risk factors. We've studied this. We know where we're losing people, and that's what we're trying to deal with. We do have to have a paradigm shift. Again, I mentioned that this is not what officers want. You know, I'm not going to do a survey trying to figure out what officers want. I can tell you this overall number I'm gonna give you is lower. I don't think we ought to be at 48. I think we ought to be at 52. You know, I think we ought to make a huge statement about this is significantly the place you should be. But 52 is not a realistic number when you deal with compression. At least that's what Anthony told me. So my proposal is well, I should say our proposal. We vetted this together a lot. Raise the entry-level salary to $48,000. Give every sworn employee the same number. Now, of course, this is going to result in, you know, it raises the entry level 10%, but the people that's got 20 years, it's going to be 4 or 5%. You know, you get that. Costs $520,000. Create a step increase for entry-level employees of 5% for the first 4 years. You'll see a chart in a minute of what that looks like. But again, that's focusing on trying to get the sniper victims up to where they're not sniped off. Okay. There's a cost in future years of increasing 5% for 2 to 4 years experience. So this chart, now I've overlaid CMPD's, did y'all? All right, my animation's got messed up here. That's okay. So I'm just overlaying where CMPD's at, and this is advertised on their website a year ago. I'm not sure if it's changed, but 8 years and a 4-year degree, 70,000. 5 years and a 4-year degree, 61,000. 3 years, you can read that. An entry level, 50,000, 4-year degree. So you can see that. And this chart here shows the gray dots show where each individual employee that we have right now is at. Okay? The number under it shows years of experience. And you're going to see another set of green dots showing what it's going to look like after we're done with this change. The gray line at the bottom is the bottom of the current ranges. The gray line at the top is top of the current ranges. So this is where those changes would go to. And you can see, I want you to look from right to left when it gets to now there's a lot of entry-level officers there. You see 0 years experience, that means they haven't completed their first year. When you see a 1, it means they've completed their first year but not their second year. When you see those numbers and you look at number 4, you can see the difference between number 4, where it's going to be, and where it's at today. And if we had a lot of number 4s in there, they'd all be up there, right? So that's the point I'm making, is we trying to change the game when it comes to those entry-level officers as they gain some valuable experience. Because if you look back at where these people are, now find a 5-year person up there and look over what their relative salary is. The very first one is making about looks like 52,000, the very first 5-year person. And CMPD advertises on their website, they'll give you 61. That's $7,000. So we're trying to get at least a step to where we're pushing people up to where they're up in that range, at those same ranges. We're going to be able to do that with this at the 3 and to a lesser degree the 5-year level, but I still want you to see the risk of, look at the officers that have 10, 15, I see a 10, 15, 11 up there, and they're going to be in the mid-60s, where they're at 70 if they went to Charlotte. I mean, this is not competitive with Charlotte, is what I'm telling you, but it's better, much better than where we're at today. And with all the changes going and with all the agencies I know are making proposals similar to mine today, we really got to jump on this, I think, and get ahead of the curve. I've always felt like we're dealing with 18-month-old numbers all the time instead of 18-month future numbers. And I certainly believe that's the case with this presentation as well.
So can you go back to the slide? I got a few questions, I guess. So we've talked about this for a few years now. So the PO one, there's a 9, 11, and a 7.
Yeah.
So why are they not progressing to SPO, MPO?
So some of those anomalies are officers that do not have the specific training.
Okay.
You've got some officers that don't put in for, they still have to apply for it. It's not automatic. But there's other responsibilities that go along with that too. For example, you may have to train.
And you were getting right at my question. We need to look at why we put these SPO, MPO programs in place to help advance folks along. And if you look at SPO, there's quite a few SPOs there, probably 3/4 of them. If you just base it on years of service, should be an MPO. Because I mean, if you look at basically say 9 years and above, they're right at that 10-year mark. I need to do some research on it and find out.
Let me say this. There's just a few anomalies, and there's a few anomalies on each one of those. But you got to realize, and you know, we don't advertise this. These are good people, but some of these may have had disciplinary that prevents them from being promoted. You have, I know one on there that's a lateral transfer that came in from another agency that hadn't met all the training requirements. So there's reasons for that. There's some people that simply don't want. They want to be a call taker. They want to answer calls. You know, some of these may be specialized assignments, for example. You got one that's going to retire in 2 months, for example. You know.
So I 100% agree. There's something in today's state of policing, something's got to be done. We've got to be creative. My first question, I was thinking, and I think this graph is very good, because my first thought was like, what if we just start, you know, in our application, we're looking for those with 5+ years experience. But I think you would probably tell me that they would have to take a pay cut based on our current plan.
Correct.
To do that.
Correct.
So either, if we were to focus on, like, we're not really gonna hire any zero or ones because of the immense cost up front, and then went to the SPO and everything beyond that, just raised that bar to become very, very competitive, would we be missing out on hiring?
The challenge with that is, if you look at where your 10-year employees are on the salary scale, they would have to be significantly higher for us to justify bringing somebody else that's got 10 years in at a higher level. And that's what it would take to be competitive laterally. See what I'm saying? Because, you know, just because they got 10 years at another agency, don't mean that 10 years is a good 10 years. You know, you still don't know. There's a lot you don't know when you recruit somebody in that you don't know, right? We've got such very, very strong officers. I mean, I'm telling you, we got a group of professionals here that, like, I've never worked with, and really dedicated people. And we can't hurt their value by recruiting in at a higher number than they're making. And that's where the expense comes in all these factors. It's compression. I'm creating compression here with this proposal. I'm creating compression from those 0, 1s, and 2s with those 5, 6, and 7s, right?
I mean, I'm thinking if we were hiring 8 people and they're new officers or 1, 2, or 3, I mean, that's technically $800,000 a year. The first year to hire those 8 people.
That's exactly right.
I would argue he's willing to hire those. It sounds like you said earlier he don't want the 0s and 1s as much as he wants the 3s and 4s and 5s. He'd be absolutely happy to hire the 0s and 1s if he could find them. There's so fewer people who are interested in that profession. He can't find the 0s and 1s, so he's going where they are, which is trying to recruit in the 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, all right, we make this adjustment, but we're still below everybody else. I mean, we're below Charlotte.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things we've talked about over the last couple of years, we may not be Charlotte, we want to be better than everybody else.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the point about this slide, and we had this discussion about whether we should put the CMPD numbers up there. I am trying to compete with Charlotte directly, even though in the last 2.5 years, we've had 4 people go to CMPD. We've had probably 2 to 2 other agencies, and the rest is state and feds, and 6 to the private sector. But I'm picking that target because if I'm competing with Charlotte, I'm competing with the private sector. I'm competing with everybody else. And, you know, it's if you look at that number and they're recruiting people in with 8 years at 70, and look at the number of people we've got above 70, a few master police officers, the rest are sergeants, lieutenants, captains. You know, we're not competing at that level for that lateral recruitment you're talking about. We're just not. And that's why I said if I had my way, that number would be 52 instead of 48 with the same escalation, but that's double the number. I mean, that's 1 million. And then add the civilian positions, which I think are important, it's 1.5 million. I mean, it's a big number. So we're trying to find a point to where we're improving things, but we're not creating as much compression.
You know, what I'll say is obviously we don't have, yes, I agree to let Chief come forward with this, and, you know, I don't know if this is what I'm gonna recommend at the end of the day to the board, but because I've got to see what all the other departments are gonna be presenting. We don't know if Michael's gonna ask for 32 people on one, or Jack or whomever else, so we've got to look at all that. But we've got to do something, and we're trying to figure that out, and what can, Chief didn't talk about, we may even look at, you know, other little things that he hadn't had a chance to mention, take-home car policies. You know, Charlotte doesn't, they have take-home car policies for specific folks, but, you know, do we expand that? Do we do, you know, other things that get creative that we're trying to look at? Can we do something different instead of the five-year SPO, 10-year MPO? Can we do 4 and 8? And, you know, do we change some of those that we already have in place that may make a difference? So, like I said, we don't have the magic bullet today, and we still got some more homework to do, but we got to do something. So that's.
I will say, I think if you approve this in its entirety this year, if things continue the way they are with national anti-police stuff and all the things that's going on, I think we're going to be back with a similar presentation next year. I don't know whether it'll be this level, but I don't think this is a 100% fix. I think it's an aggressive adjustment is probably about the best I would give it. And, you know, I've been, you were here, Ben Anthony and Jackie debating this issue. You know, he's like, man, you're killing me. You know, I said, yeah, but I don't think I'm killing you enough because I really don't. But I understand that police is not the only function in this town. And y'all got a lot of things on your plate. So
I just got one more question for now. I see a lot of 23s, 32s, 21s. Over the next 5 years, I mean, it looks like we may have another problem. Retirement's coming up.
right.
Can you give me a number? I mean, are we looking, you know, we're losing 6 officers a year now.
Yeah.
It's going to be 3 to retirement every year going forward for the next 5 years.
Yeah, we're going to have consistent retirements. You know, the 32 is, he wouldn't mind me mentioning him, Mike Collins. He retired 20 years in LAPD and came to work here, but I think he's getting close. We've got one next week. One of our detectives retiring next week. Of course, I may try to hire him back part-time to help with crime scene. He's an expert at crime scene stuff. So some of them are retiring. We may not lose them if we can rehire them on a part-time basis. You know, we don't know. We can work that out or not. We don't know what his plans are. He'll be able to dictate that. But we're going to have consistent retirements for sure. And I think that's built into the risk, right? We know that's coming. What I'm trying to do is eliminate the lateral transfers out and be able to recruit heavily in.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Chief, of the shifts, are we putting on the manpower that has been authorized on every shift? If it's 8 people, do we have 8 people every night, every day?
No.
So we're,
No. I will tell you, we're not dangerously low, but we do have some shifts that we have to call in people to work extra shifts to cover. You know, we might have some people in some mandatory training that we have to do. Here recently, we've had people out with COVID quarantine. That's really been difficult to deal with. We had one shift that we had to call in a half of another shift to cover just because of COVID.
okay, two other points. I see that all the extra people you want, but I really didn't see anybody there to manage the mental health of these employees that we've invested in. Is that any future plans of yours to?
Well, actually, yes, we've worked, and Laura, I know, and Barry's worked together a lot on some emotional stress type things with our EAP providers, and looking at different options we have there. Of course, we've always got, if an officer comes to us and say, hey, I'm having problems, and I know they don't always do, okay, I'm aware of that. And that's what we're looking at the EAP side of it for, because that's anonymous and things. But if they come to us with any kind of issues like that, we're gonna fall over ourselves to get them help and help them through that. But I know, Barry, I don't know where y'all at with Laura. Y'all have that discussion, hadn't you, about EAP and,
Can you get a cat named Dog?
there you go.
We can. That was also the offered.
But I know they've had discussions from the McConnell Group or whoever it is, yeah, McLaughlin, about what kind of options we had to expand those services.
Okay.
When I saw that on the list of questions, that the end of the day list, I actually had them go back and research where we're at on that, and yeah. So,
And my last point is, I think that since I've been on the board, this has come up every year. And it seems like we've been catching up, trying to do this, and we're throwing a little crumbs here and a little crumbs here. I like to see us sit down and solve this thing once and for all. It's, you guys are a commodity that we cannot get, and to get that, you have to pay for it. I think it's time that we step up.
thank you. I want to also, go ahead.
Yeah, 2 questions and actually a follow-up on Commissioner Boone. So, and maybe I missed it in this slide, we're at 102 officers. Are you asking for more next year?
No, I'm not asking for more because.
Because you say we're down 39.
We're down, no, we have 10 vacancies.
I'm sorry, you said to get us up to the ratio.
That would be 36 plus the 10 vacancies.
Right.
Now, I will tell you this, we get audited every year by our accreditation. We spend a lot of money. And our on-site accreditation, which is a virtual on-site, go figure. But that's next month. And we had to do a staff analysis for that. Now, our staff analysis, what I showed you was a comparative analysis, right, between other agencies. A staff analysis takes our actual cost for service and the amount of time we spend on calls and divide that by, take away the vacation time, the manpower availability factor is what we call it. It's complicated. But then that gives us a number of how many officers you need to cover your calls. That number showed 30, okay? Our comparative analysis showed 36. But I think where that difference is our officers do our own crime scene. And when you use the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, average of 45 minutes a call, it does not include officers doing crime scenes. So I think that's where that number is. But I'll take the 30 number.
So even
We
use,
have 102 authorized full-time positions, so he would not be at full staff unless he had 102 full-time positions. So since he's 10 down, he'd be absolutely more than happy to ask for additional positions. And quite frankly, Anthony and I would recommend funding additional positions if we thought we could fill them. But what's the point of asking for more positions if we can't fill them? And
That's
so
why I asked for civilian positions. right?
okay,
'Cause I can
my
fill them.
concern is that next year that's gonna be, even using the 30 number, it's gonna be 35,
It will.
and then it's gonna
It
be
will.
40. And if tomorrow morning the floodgates opened up and we could fill all those positions, now you're having to come back and say, oh, well, I need 30 new people in September or something. So I'm a little bit concerned that we don't fund additional positions even if we can't. And then following up on Commissioner Boone's, I mean, if we're down essentially 40, you know, if it's a few more bucks to, and let's face it, you get down Old Statesville Road, on one side of the road it's us, and the other side it's Charlotte. That's who we're competing with. Maybe we need to up the funding a little bit, considering how, because even if we could get to 102, competing dollar for dollar with Charlotte, we're gonna attract some from maybe
We will.
Concord or wherever else, or maybe we get them to come across the border and work for us. But we're not gonna get them to come across the border if we give them a pay cut.
Yeah. I will assure you, if the recruiting situation changes, I'll be back to talk about people. I was, for 2 years, I've been telling them, I gotta have a training coordinator, I gotta fill that other captain's position, I need to put more people on the road. I've been saying that for years, but honestly, with 10 vacancies, I'd much rather spend that money on civilian positions that we don't have that I can fill.
So that's what I was actually gonna ask about. Sounds like you guys need help. If you need civilian positions now, I don't see why we're gonna talk about this now and then summer fill them. Like, if you need them now, we just need to handle it and focus on that, because we gotta think about kids graduating college in the spring and making it so you guys are one of the competitors and you have those non-sworn positions out there. So if we need to go ahead and do budget adjustment stuff now to get them what they need and relieve some of that pressure off the cops, I'd rather just get it done now, because that's not right to make them suffer for, what, 4 or 5 more months and miss out on hiring people out of grads, not even just bachelor's degrees, but grad school and their master's degrees too.
I want to say, any other questions on the presentation? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I think one of my biggest frustrations from your presentation, I know you're probably more frustrated, but I've heard for many years, we need more civilians to fill in for the jobs that the police officers are doing. So I guess I'm not quite sure why some of those positions haven't been hired. So that's one. That should help with job satisfaction here, obviously. Retention, you know, I'm always a big bonus guy, and I think the bonuses did, if 6 out of 8 were recruited, but I think something where a retention bonus, if you're still here a year from now, you get X, and then you get paid out over 6 months. I mean, that's what the big banks do, right? They get you the golden handcuffs. Recruiting, yeah, you just have to be different, right? You have to kind of look at things differently, and I don't know if we always are competing with Charlotte. I think we're just competing with the nature of what's going on in our society more than anything. I don't know how we're gonna correct that other than the board and you and our citizens continuously supporting our men and women, and being maybe a different, it should be what every community's doing, but it should be able to attract people from some that aren't getting as much support.
Yeah, and we got to do better about getting our message out about just how valuable these people are. I mean, y'all appreciate them, and I appreciate that. But I sit over every day and I think, man, these people's awesome. I mean, you just don't realize how much they take on that you didn't even think about. And they get into people's problems. And when they get into people's problems, they stick with them. They take on things that is so proactive and it's so community oriented long before I got here. But I didn't see it till I got here. And these people really are very, very good. They're not just another warm body. And that's what frustrates me is I'm losing people that are very good at what they do. And they may be going somewhere else and not be expected to do what they've been doing here, but they're making more money. And I get why they're leaving. So I appreciate that, and I really do appreciate those comments. I really encourage that y'all see the value of it. And I hope I'm asking for enough to make a difference in that retention, but I'm not confident that I'm all the way there. So I appreciate any thoughts about, you know, alternatives and anything like that. I wanted to say before I sit down is I want to thank everybody that's made efforts, and I know Commissioner Unger has, and of trying to get our vaccines to our officers. I know I've seen your emails, and I really appreciate that. I know Bobby has worked very hard to find options. We've got, I really think the county's let us down. Not directly, but we've got other counties, all of Gaston County's inoculated. We've got Davidson County inoculated. We've got officers all over that's already got their second shot and's had it for a month. And we don't have the first shot for the first officer, So it's very frustrating. And a lot of you's really worked hard, and I just wanted to thank you on behalf of them. Not every officer wants it. We have the same demographics that everybody else. We got people that think they would never take that shot. But we've got a lot that do want it. And I appreciate the effort y'all made, and hopefully we'll figure this out. CMPD is leading the way. They've set up an injection site at their academy. They've got all the pieces in place. They're just waiting to get the product, and they're going to get everybody inoculated. Anywhere in any law enforcement officer that shows up, doesn't matter what state they're from, they're going to shoot them. So we appreciate the effort. It's been very frustrating. It's been very hard to explain to officers why other ones are getting it and we're not. But y'all have really worked hard to try to move the needle, and I appreciate that very much, and they do too.
I'll be Tuesday meeting with somebody in the governor's office, and that was one of my topics of conversation other than pipeline, but so.
Well, thank y'all for all your support. You've always been there.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, quick question. I know you and I have had correspondence, and I know, kind of build on something the mayor said about not, the civilian roles being able to free up time for police officers to do police-related activities. And I know I kind of came at you last minute with the idea of integrating social workers into the police department. And some things are lost in email, and I just want to have a bit of a conversation with you and try and get an understanding. Is this something that you feel like would work for Huntersville to be able to bring on social workers? And maybe it's not this year, maybe it's just at some point we try and figure out how to integrate it. So
Absolutely. I don't disagree. We have like victims advocates that we contract with, and we find those services to be very valuable to us. I think, and as I mentioned in my email to you, I think it's a matter of how do we integrate that. So, there's some national talk about not sending police officers to drug overdose cases, sending social workers and stuff. I don't agree with that, because a lot of times you walk in there and there's a fight going on, or it's a dangerous situation. And social workers, by the way, which I agree with you, has a negative connotation sometimes, but they're awesome people. But they are as overworked as police are. So my question to you would be, actually your question to me, is how would we integrate those services so that they're value-added services? If we just send them with an officer, I think they would have some benefit, but that's not offsetting anything. And I think that was your point, is how do we offset? So I don't know what level of training, what level of certification, what kind of liability we have. If we send a social worker in to solve a problem, are we taking on the liability if that social worker is not certified in providing that service? And if they are, is that something that's already available to you? See what I'm saying? I do not disagree with that at all. I think there's mental health. I'll give you an example. Police have been the go-to person for serving involuntary commitment orders. It's not a police-related matter, but we have handcuffs and we have officers on the street 24/7, and we can go sit with the patient at the hospital until the doctor gets done golfing or whatever and wait for them to come, right? So that's how police got it. We didn't get it because we have an expertise in mental health, right? Things like that, I think, is perfectly suited for what you're talking about. And I'm sure from a domestic violence follow-up and things like that, I'm sure there's overlaps. And maybe some of the contracts we have, and I know nonprofits won't want to hear this, but if we did find a way to implement that, maybe they could also take over some of the victims advocate services that we're already donating for. So I do think there's definitely moves there. It didn't get in the presentation because it came in late.
Understand.
And I think it's worth having that conversation, because the thought process is the same, right? What can we do with experts instead of sworn officers? I think it's exactly the same concept.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm sure there's more to discuss. Thank you for your time and your service, and I don't know, we'll be back in 11:40.
Negative 2 minutes.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chief, you only went over by.
It's 'cause you talk.
Bring me a chair and trip on my cord, I'll get one.
seeing you.
Good luck. So I guess Commissioner Hines is on a call, so we'll just move on without him.
Okay, I know we're bumping up against the lunchtime hour, so I'm
No,
gonna
no.
try to make this, very short.
Take your time. Take
Well,
your
most
time.
of it we've actually gone over before. The first slide is actually a legal project update, and this is just by way of letting you know what we've been working on. One of the big things is that I had been helping Bobby and Anthony with the new town hall project, doing research on the design build process, establishing the criteria, going back and forth with edits with Bobby on the draft RFQ. We also, as you are aware, drafted and updated a code of ethics for the board and also a new code for the other town boards, commissions, and committees. This is a statutory requirement for the town board, but we did want to expand that to the other committees, boards, etc. And we were able to incorporate in some of the new 160D definitions, so I think that was a good time to do that. We are working with the Board of Adjustment, doing the same thing with their rules of procedure. We've updated any outdated legal references to 160A with new 160D updates. We've also, as you're aware, worked on the hub outreach plan and establishing a verifiable percentage goal for the town with regards to building projects. Things that are in progress. 160D edits overall, we have crunched out several of the sections. We are working with Jack on that. I think that right now I'm on Article 11, and Jacob has started on the subdivision ordinance, so we should have about 4 sections of that ready for Jack as well by next week. We do need to make some edits to the rules of procedure for the Board of Commissioners to make sure that any of the outdated legal references to 160A are replaced by 160D references. The same with Planning Board. As far as other things that are in progress, we have been working on looking at some feasibility options for new ordinances and updating existing ordinances. I know that one thing had come on our radar with regards to some of the existing animal control ordinances. The chief had mentioned that the police department will likely be sending over some recommendations to make sure that everything's up to date, so we'll be taking a look at that in the future. Also, future plans. We want to help the Public Works Department. Some of their standard forms and templates that they're currently using need to be updated to include updated legal references and also just things that could be perfected in terms of their templates so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time that they're looking to establish a contract. We also want to take a look at the training procedure for volunteer boards. That's something that's been on our radar. We likely won't get to that, I would say, until probably maybe spring, summer. We would like to do that in person rather than virtually, but we would obviously vet those prior to implementing any new procedures. We also wanted to discuss at some point a contracting delegation option for the town board. We will discuss that in the qualification-based selection slide that I have. This is something that Angie had actually started. I believe she provided you at the last retreat with a chart that mentioned what other jurisdictions do in terms of contract delegation. So that's something for us to look at in the future, whether or not you might want to delegate some more authority to Anthony based on perhaps a dollar threshold amount so that they don't have to come before the town board every time. Obviously, if it's required by statute, it would still come before the board. Finally, we want to work on creating a purchasing and contracting policy that is comprehensive for the town. We do have some standalone policies in place currently, but we would like to develop one single document that is comprehensive that covers all of that, so that the department heads can go to one document versus looking at, let's say, 5 or 6 documents. So the topics of discussion: qualifications-based selection, historically underutilized businesses, and the minority business participation in contracting. That's what we recently had before the board at a recent meeting. And also conflicts of interest in contracting. This is more so just a refresher. So first topic, qualifications-based selection. What is it? It's selection based on qualifications rather than based on price. It's accomplished through requests for qualifications,
and you award it to the best qualified firm or contractor rather than based on price again. And when should it be used? There's really no dollar threshold for it. It's more so based on the category or type of contract. So under the Mini Brooks Act, there are several things set forth there. The professional engineers, architects, and surveyors, you must use qualification-based selection. Also, qualification-based selection must be used for selecting a design builder, design build bridging, and construction management at-risk services. There is the ability to exempt certain contracts that are under 50,000. So you've got an extra zero there, but that should be 50,000. They may be exempted from the qualification-based selection process if you have a written exemption. And we already have a delegation of authority there for Anthony to do that. But I would say that as far as expanding upon that, and this is specific to letting a different process be used rather than qualification-based selection. So if it's under 50,000, if you get an exemption, you could actually base it on price rather than qualifications. But expanding upon that, as you'll see on the next slide, the governing board doesn't actually have to approve contracts for qualification-based selection. So that's where we have some flexibility there if we wanted to, draft another delegation of authority. It could be based on a price range, it could be all qualification-based selection contracts, but that's something we want to look at in the future if we maybe want to delegate that authority to the town manager rather than the town board, since it does have to be based on qualifications and not price. Also, something to note, for qualification-based selection contracts, you don't have to have a certain number of responses for those subject to Mini Brooks Act. However, for design build, and this will come up with the new town hall project, if we don't receive at least 3 qualified responses, we will have to put it back out for an additional time period. Segueing into the next topic, for qualification-based selection, we do have to make a good faith effort to let those that were seeking the qualifications from the statements of qualification. We do need to make a good faith effort to let historically underutilized businesses and minority businesses know about this opportunity. And this was addressed in the Hub Outreach Plan that we just recently created. So segueing in, this is kind of just a summary slide of what applies in which instance. And for projects that are over 100,000, if they involve state dollars, state funding, grant funding, etc. If it's over $100,000, then that verifiable goal of 10% or higher participation does kick in. We opted to mirror our 10% verifiable percentage goal for locally funded projects that are $300,000 or more. And again, I've set forth kind of a summary there about what does that mean. And it's more detailed in our plan that we created, but basically just collecting information about who is submitting a bid and then going on and putting that in our report to the Hub office. Anyone have any questions before moving on? I know this is kind of a whirlwind summary.
Well, I guess my question is, so if you don't have an underutilized business submitting, does that slow down the process of going ahead and awarding the contract?
No, it's more so, like I said, about good faith efforts, and as long as you follow those efforts that we've set forth in the plan, as long as you document that on our end, we're okay. Now also, and this again is with regards to those in the formal range, and the formal range for purposes of Hub is over 300,000 for building projects. There is also a requirement for those that are responding to the contract solicitation as well. And so we have to get that documentation from them to show that they followed the process on their end as well. So if they didn't, that could potentially slow up the process, but it's all about good faith efforts.
So on our application, there's a box that says, I am not historically underutilized business, or I am, or, how I mean,
That's actually one of the areas that we're working on streamlining the documents, because several of the departments had been sort of doing their own thing. And that's why it was very important to establish that overarching Hub outreach plan. So, and I've actually forwarded that to all the departments that need it thus far. But they should be able to use that plan and streamline the processes so that they're all using the same checklist, rather than using one for Parks and Rec and using one for Public Works and Engineering. That was the whole point, was to kind of streamline that so that they were all working from the same plan.
Okay.
Third topic, conflicts of interest in contracts. And I have provided you all with a handout that was created by someone from the School of Government. It's a little bit more detailed than what I've put up on the slides, and it should answer any questions that you might have. But for the purposes of this presentation, I didn't include as much detail. The three big conflicts of interest statutes are 14-234 on self-benefiting, 133-32 for gifts and favors, and 14-234.1 on insider trading. So the first one prohibits self-benefiting or deriving a direct benefit if you are making or administering the contract. And so what that means is a public officer or employee who makes or administers the contract on behalf of a public agency, the town, cannot also derive a direct benefit from that same contract unless an exception applies. I didn't list out all the exceptions for this, but it would be something with, let's say, a banking institution if you have a loan, let's say, but there are a handful of exceptions and they're all outlined, I believe, on page 2 to 3 of the handout that you have. This particular statute also prohibits you from influencing others if you are deriving a direct benefit. So what does that mean? A public officer or employee who will derive a direct benefit from a contract but is not involved in making it cannot then influence the person who is involved in making or administering the contract. And then finally, getting gifts in exchange for influencing others. A public officer or employee shall not solicit or receive any gift, reward, or promise of a reward in exchange for recommending, influencing, or attempting to influence the award of the contract. So again, I just wanted to reiterate that we have the opportunity to have a delegation of authority for contracts. And while that doesn't change the requirement to follow this statute, it's just something to take into consideration. Gifts and favors, section General Statute 133-32. A public officer or employee may not accept gifts or favors from a past, and what does past mean? Within the past year, or current or potential future vendor or contractor if the officer or employee is charged with the duty of any of the following. And it lists out there basically making the contract, inspecting or supervising, or also preparing plans that might be subject to the contract. There are also exceptions to this particular statute, and what does that include? Awards such as trophies, plaques that you may receive, things like pins, cups, mugs, which are advertising options, or, you know, they're pretty much nominal value. Meals at banquets, gifts to professional organizations, and gifts from family or friends, but those must be reported to the agency head. So again, if you go to, let's say, some sort of organization's conference and they give you a cup or a pin, that's not necessarily going to be in violation of the statute.
Unless they paid for it.
Finally, insider trading. This one doesn't come up all that often, but just as a reminder, public officer or employee may not benefit or help someone else benefit from use of non-public information that that person has learned through their official position. So that was very short and brief. As I mentioned, the handout has much more detail, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have. I know that several of these topics we had already recently addressed in terms of the hub outreach plan, the verifiable percentage, and also in speaking about conflicts. Any questions?
So, and this is just on your goals. You know, we talked about that and so forth, and one of them was attending some of the BOA and Planning Board and HOAB. Now, have you figured out how that may work going forward now that we have?
Yes. So there are several of the meetings where Jacob and I have both been attending, but for the most part, Jacob, I'm happy to say, has been able to attend all of the Board of Adjustment and Planning Board meetings.
And how about the HOAB?
I have been going to those. I did miss one of the meetings due to Jacob's interview and the other candidates' interviews. So I was unable to make that one, but for the most part, I have been. And we have so far been, I would say 95% of the ones that I've gone to, we've been discussing 160D edits and the progress towards that goal.
Okay. Any other?
Mr. Mayor, I had the opportunity of watching the Board of Adjustment meeting this month, I guess, and Jacob was there, and we needed Jacob there at that particular meeting. And Jacob, I'd just like to say good job. I don't know if it was your first meeting or not, but we definitely needed legal counsel there.
And Jacob will be helping implement the new proposed training that we roll out, like I said, I'd say closer to spring, summer, for the volunteer boards, including Planning Board and Board of Adjustment. We'd like to make sure that the training that's provided to each of those boards is in line. Obviously, they handle different things. Board of Adjustment, for example, handles variances, but we want to make sure that they're both getting the same type of information.
I just want to say I'm super duper grateful you're both here. Like, you guys have made things run so much smoother in your own ways, and it's really appreciated.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for Jacob. He has been a great help so far. All right.
Welcome, Jacob.
Well, I know it is about lunchtime, so that's all I have.
And I will ditto what everyone else is saying. I mean, Emily and Jacob are killing it. I mean, getting it done. And the product that they put out there on some of these ordinances are, you know, some of them can be so baffling to understand and read that seems to be pretty straightforward, understandable. So they're doing a heck of a job. I think the department heads will say too, they are very efficient of meeting their needs, because they'll throw crap on the desk sometimes, you know, like that. Oh, I forgot I need this. And Emily and Jacob have stepped it up and been very efficient on dealing with those things. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, I guess
Thanks.
we have lunch break now?
That's what it says.
Yep.
We'll start at 12:45.
12:45.
I'll see y'all later.
Down the back?
Maybe 50-50.
Well, I don't want two of you then to be here.
Who else can? Are you? Okay, no, I'll be back by 12:45.